Well, well, well. Buckled in for another 20 minutes. So, you know what? I might actually even do it just because you said that. L Twitch chat. L. Simply L. L. The power we have over the streamer. What do you mean what power you have? You telling me that you're getting ready for starting soon? What power does that have? You think you can make it shorter, buddy? I will make it as long as it needs to be. Just until I'm ready. That's the whole point. It's a get ready stream. Hey Max, are you ready to stream yet? No. Alright, well I'm not going live. I feel like you guys need it too, whether you think about it or not. Like, you can't just like tune in my stream and you're just ready to watch a stream, you know? You gotta like mentally prepare for that. All right, boys. Someone asked earlier, what interview questions are we ranking? So basically, I think the interview is tomorrow. So we have a lot of questions written down, and Scott is going to do the interview with me. So we have to like split up questions, which means we need to kind of like rank which ones are the most important and kind of decide the like flow of the interview. Dude, you know what that just made me think of? I've done 2 streams so far where I've kind of worked on the interview questions a little bit. And I have had at least one chatter each time say something along the lines of, are you sure you should be streaming your questions ahead of time, as that will give the developers a chance to prepare for them? And that is the most fucking wild thing. It's crazy. It's like, that's like, first off, that would be great if they were extra prepared for the questions. Like, why would that be bad? Like, in some people's minds, the interviews are not, they're not best served to get answers from the community. They're best served to use that time to like better the developers, like prove to them that they're wrong or that you're smarter than them or something. Like, that's the only thing I can think of is what they're trying to get at, which is just insane. So did you guys think Ansrek was too hard? They start answering it. Gotcha. I have some stats. It was too fucking hard. Fuck you. It's insane. It's fucking insane. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. It's just a debate, yeah. Max, don't you have to pre-submit the questions and have Blizzard vet them? No. You can just have them show up with no questions. You don't have to send them in. But what sending them in does is allows, when you're talking to people like Ian and Morgan, who are the heads, they're the like director and associate director of WoW, If you're asking them a specific question about X system in the game, what they usually do is they'll go talk to those people and get a more concrete answer because they're not on the ground working on every single part of the game all the time. So it's good to do stuff like that, right? Like if you don't give them any preparation, you weren't to pre-send them questions, they probably wouldn't be giving you the most fully thought out, thorough answer, which would be bad for everyone. And for the gain, I don't even understand what the gain would be. But I don't think... I think anyone that is using logic and reason has come to that conclusion. I'm pretty sure the people who are saying the alternate are the people who really want to get the devs in the interview. I mean, you're probably not going to change their mind by explaining it to them, so I don't know why I do that. You know, they're like, it's already too far gone kind of thing. Max 371 guilds killed Mythic Unat. Thoughts? I don't really have any thoughts, really. That sounds about right. They released it a month and a half after Battle of the Zara lore released. And Eternal Palace came out like 2 or 3 months after. So it was an extremely hard raid that was released while almost every single guild wasn't even done with the already previously really hard boss, Jaina. So just no one even did it. Like, I guess in a way, like, they do kind of vet some questions. Like, I remember sending in questions on one of my first interviews, and I was asking them how their patch, this was going into Dragonflight, because it seemed like we were getting more, like, content per patch, like 10.0.5 and 10.0.7, like the Onyx Amulet, all the changes, all that stuff. That's more than what we get in normal patch. So basically my question was, like, can we expect this from patches going forward? Have you put more emphasis on having post-patch release content within the patch? That was the question. And I think it was a good question, to be honest with you. But they basically came back and said, hey, if you want to replace this question with something else, as in all interviews, we don't discuss anything. Unless we've announced the next patch, we're not talking about what our plans are for patch content. Which totally makes sense. They've never done that in any interview. They're not denying that, but if I would have kept asking that question, they would have just given me a non-answer. So they gave me an opportunity to replace that question with one they would actually get an answer from, which is good for the interview, the people listening to it, and everyone. Right? Max, do you think that mini raids once or twice in X-Pack would be good for the health of the game in addition to the usual size raid? Oh, we talked about that on the podcast this week, or maybe it was the bonus episode or something, but maybe he actually was on stream. I think he was on stream, actually, when we watched some interview thing. But yeah, I think if you do that right, I think that can be done. Not to mention, I think in an interview recently, they actually pretty much confirmed that. That they're planning on doing that? It was kind of not certain. Here, we can go live here. It wasn't super obvious whether they were talking about like releasing mini raids throughout the expansion, similar to like Crucible of Storms, right? It was more like they might do a tier 11 kind of thing where instead of Nerebar Palace being an 8 boss raid, it might be a 6 boss raid, and then another raid releases at the same time with only 2 bosses in it. That I think is significantly less cool because it's basically the same. Like, to me, there being 8 bosses released at the beginning of a season and all of them being in one raid versus them being spread out in different raids, that means nothing to me. Like, outside of nostalgia from tier 11 and classic, like, that it's still, there's 8 bosses released. They probably are, let's just say for the sake of argument, the exact same bosses. They're just put in different places with slightly different aesthetics. I guess that's kind of cool. It's probably not worth it for Blizzard, though, because what takes the most time in raiding is, like, creating art and concepts of the raids and what they look like. So if you're doing that for 2 totally different aesthetics, even though you're creating the same 8 bosses, it probably takes like 50% longer because you have to just create an entire new area as well. So I would say the idea of having like a 0.0, 0.5 or a 0.0.7 patch having a raid, little mini raid, I think that's significantly better and more interesting than just releasing more raids at the beginning of a season, because I don't think that functionally changes anything with how the game is played right now. It's the exact same thing. They wouldn't be the same bosses by virtue of the raid structure demanding that they be different. Okay, so explain what you mean. So let's say you do 6 bosses in Nerebar Palace. I don't even know which ones you'd take out of Nerebar Palace, but let's just say any 2. What would a 2-boss raid look like? Would it have a legit end boss? So there'd just be an extra end boss in that patch? I promise you the raiding community would not like that. Is the last boss in there going to be like a second to last boss level difficulty? Is the first boss going to be a little bit harder? I think the last 2-boss raid we all saw was Crucible of Storms, which had a very difficult end boss and a very difficult first boss. Do you think that the raiding community would rather have 2 less easy bosses and 2 more bosses like Brood Twister or Kai'Veza and harder? I don't think so. Or let's just say it's the alternative of that. It's the 2-boss raid, but it's the easier bosses. Let's say they put Sikran and Rashanan in there. Okay. You know? Like, cool, man. But then, like, what are we even doing here? Why is it even different? I think for Blizzard, it like doesn't even make sense. Why would you put in 50% more effort just to release the same raid with slightly different cosmetics? I don't think that would like be a big service to the players, and it would increase their workload by a shit ton, which means less of other content, less prepared for the new thing coming out. I think that is the problem, is a mid-tier raid, who are you making it for exactly? Well, the other option of just making 2 raids at the beginning of a patch instead of just 1, I don't know who you're making that for other than the people that are already raiding, and I don't think it's any different. But if you're releasing a raid mid-patch, that's a great question. I think you make it for everyone. My cook for a while was make it a slight... You have a heroic and a mythic difficulty, but the mythic is like a little bit easier than like N-tier mythic regular raid stuff. And probably same with heroic, because you have to consider that it's content being done after the other thing is done. And adding on another full entire difficulty is too much for the amount of time it takes for people to clear Mythic right now. So I think you make it 10-man, and I think you make it slightly easier. I think you just go the exact opposite direction as Crucible. You made Crucible, no one interacted with it because it was really hard, and it was after the other thing that was already really hard at the same time. Well, if you're going to do that, which is basically the same time frame now, is what you'd be doing in the War Within. You'd be releasing it like a month and a half to 2 months after in a 0.5 or 0.7. You would do... you would make it 10-man, so it's more accessible, or you would make it, or you would just make it a little easier. Like, it making it harder than Battle of Dazar'alor was such an insane mistake, but it makes sense because they knew the only people who were going to interact with it were people who were already done with Battle of Dazar'alor, who were looking for a challenge because they were already done with the raid in a month. But then it made it inaccessible to everyone else, which is kind of interesting that Blizzard decided to make Crucible of Storms, and almost by design, it was intentional that it was super difficult, which means they knew for a fact they were making it for such a small percentage of the player base, which is just fascinating to me. Having 2 raids and the smaller one being easier, almost like a loot pinata, would be cool. It helps people dip their toes into the raiding environment while having to commit too much less time. How is that any more different than just doing the first 2 bosses in Nerebar Palace? I guess it kind of breaks up the lockout a little bit to where, let's just say you put I don't know the first boss's name. Olgrax. Let's say you put Olgrax and... Oh, I don't know the second boss's name either. Let's say you put both of those in its own instance. And then Nerebar Palace starts with Sikran into Rashanan. It kind of breaks it up a little bit, so you... but it's basically the only thing that helps is the Mythic Lockout. It just allows you to start at 2 different places. Which doesn't have 0 value. But I don't know if it has nearly enough value to actually make sense for them making an entire different raid, which would slow down their workflow a lot. Two raids with 4 bosses each with varying difficulty, forcing you to alternate. Yeah, I just don't know. I don't really know what that does. I also think it's going to be really hard for them to make 10-man content with the current layout of this game. Like, if you were to do 10-man raids, here, do you guys want to do a little exercise? What would it look like if you were to do 10-mans right now if they weren't going to change anything else about the game? You can actually do this. Because I think we'd actually be able to tell what the 10-man comp is, like, right now. You wouldn't even have to think that hard about it. It would be... Because there are more than 10 raid buffs in this game, which means every class you bring has to be a raid buff, basically, and then you just choose the 10 best. And then what roles those classes most likely go with. Let's do that. What is the... I think the sheet was called, like, no. It is called no. Let's go. Wahoo! Alright, so let's do this. Little 10-man experiment. So these are this is what happened throughout the expansions with raid buffs. So what happens if we make a 10-man? Oh, that was the chat's guess for the race. The triple mage comp. Alright, so what do 10-mans look like? Okay, let's just put all these to the side just so we have something to pick from. Let me get the raid layout option here. I don't know what border's going on here, but we need all the borders to be gone. No borders. Thank you. All right. So what would you bring to a 10-man? Okay. So number one, you need a Demon Hunter. So let's just assume that DH DPS usually is the play, like historically over tank. Plus we're just going to really need some tank buffs here. Let's do that. Monk... Super... do you need a monk and a 10-man? Monk is way down the list. I don't think you slot in a monk yet at all. You definitely need a paladin. So that could easily be tank or healer. Priest, I think, is pretty easy. Let's go ahead and just throw a priest in as the healer because Shadow Priest is just such a niche DPS spec that you'd rather not bring that from a DPS spot. Shadow Priest is pretty much exclusively a 20-man spec unless they would change a lot about how it works. All right, let's do... What else? Okay, so you need a mage for sure. That buffs the healers. So, oh, we need to make these better, so... All right, let's get the formatting right here. That's going to drive me crazy. Sure. Oh, also. Shaman is a required buff. That currently would be an enhanced shaman. I would say you'd put enhance here because while you could play a resto shaman, I think that enhance is just... Okay, so currently enhance is just insanely good. Like, it's just really overtuned. But I also think Enhanced Shaman is just a perfect class for a 10-man because they have everything you want. They have, like, good damage at every level, single target, multi-target cleave, big AoE. They have insane utility per, which I guess is true of any Shaman class. But they have the ability to burst or be, like, really sustained. I think you'd play an Enhanced Shaman. But although in a 10-man, you'd probably need more versatile players. So they could certainly swing Enhance LA. Most likely not be a role swapper. Those are really rare. Paladin, we still need to kind of keep in mind. So classes we need to slot in, but we're not sure of their shit yet. So let's delete Monk. We already have Monk. Let's delete DH. We already have DH. Warlock in a 10-man absolutely becomes really... Oh, let's get Mage in there. You definitely need a Mage. Warlock is super not required. Warlock gains a lot more power the more players you have in the raid, my opinion. I think you'd probably still make a case for it, but certainly worth mentioning that it's certainly less. Rogue, the DR poison is like way reduced in value. Druid is absolutely needed. But again, Druid is... DK would almost never be brought in a 10-man in the current way the game works. A fight would have to require grips. Oh no, DK... I mean... That's the weird thing about DK, right? You would just sit it for every fight that, unless it was really overtuned DPS, you would sit DK for every fight that doesn't have like the need for grips. Like this tier, what boss needed? I mean, yeah, but like Brood Twister wouldn't look the same if it was designed for 10-man though. Because, like, you needed a certain amount of buttons. You wouldn't have... That's an exact kind of a boss that would be different. That, if you guys ever wondered why some bosses were impossibly hard for 10-man versus 25 back in MoP and before that, and some bosses were, like, way easier, it's because certain bosses just cannot be made the same for both, because certain raid fights take advantage of the fact that there's 20 people in the raid, and you just can't make that same fight for 10, or else it just is a shit show, so it just changes a lot. I'm trying to think. Right now, we have two classes that scale off Battle Shout. Okay, so you're definitely going to need a warrior. That could be a tank. I'm going to say you're probably going to end up bringing this as a tank almost permanently, but the only problem with doing two raid buff tanks is that removes your ability to bring a... So Monk, I'm really thinking you don't bring. So unless Monk, again, was like super overtuned... Warrior is giving you a flat 5% buff to at least 2 DPS and maybe more. Monk is not giving you anywhere close to a 5% buff because you're never bringing a Hunter. Hunter's mark is nowhere good enough to ever be brought. Hunter would have to be best single target by an enormous amount. Like, compare to how much a Druid would have to be better than a Druid. Like, Druid is bringing 3% damage to the entire raid, at least, versus 1, right? So, like, 3% of the raid's DPS is... Like, even that would have beaten... Like, Balance for Feral Druid would have beaten Hunter this tier, for example. Like, as bad as those classes were and how good Hunter was. Lock's got to be in. Really? What makes you think that? Like, I'm just thinking as, like... So, I make comps for a living, right? That's part of what I do. Like, if you're in a 10-man, you kind of have to start bringing down things that are... Like, raid buffs no longer become... They're only considered required in your head because of the amount of raid spots and how many things you can bring. As soon as there are more raid buffs than there are classes you can bring, you start having to rank raid buffs. And if you're talking about like now if you're talking like just you raid 2 days a week and you need to have a warlock for summons and shit, I'm talking like you're trying to be as good as possible. And that is not auto slotting warlock, by the way. You do want druid. The only problem is I'm thinking you find a way to make... I mean, it totally depends on tuning, but tank is kind of unlikely. I'm thinking because of how prevalent grips are in the game, you're going to want to leave that second tank spot not to be a raid buff, and it's going to be like basically no class, but just like strongest tank at the moment. And there usually is one that's like super insane, like Pally and Mythic Plus right now after the buffs. Probably Pally and Raid right now after the buffs. And Druid DPS has been really bad in the last 2 tiers, so it's kind of hard to remember, but like historically they're really strong, so probably only Mage. No, Mage is like a Mage is kind of a slam dunk. It buffs the 2 healers, which is really important. Buffs itself with a really strong buff, even though Arcane Int was nerfed. I guess you'd have to see how many casters you'd need here for Warrior or Mage. But the problem is like, with DPS in this game, DPS is so specific to a patch, you know? Like, for example, think about how good Dev was this patch. Devastation Evoker was like the MVP of this raid. They were so strong. And like, how could you ever fit a Dev Evoker into... Actually, I don't know. Like, in a way, Evoker DPS gains so much power. I mean, you'd probably just play one Aug, right? Aug or Dev, whatever's stronger, because... Like, one Aug loses a little bit of value when you're not double stacking with 2, but think about how important having one rescue is in a 20-man. When you have 10 players, the rescue in itself is like a little bit more value, because every time you're using it, you are shielding 20% of your raid rather than 10%. And you're also moving 20% of your players instantly instead of 10%, which is significant. Zephyr also is a 20% DR for half of the raid now. So, like, even though Evoker's overall raid buff is actually weaker than... even though Evoker's raid buff, whatever it's... I don't even know what it's called. Bronze something. That is useless, basically. It's not useless. Like, it does actually allow you on some fights to have, like, your movement spell for every single time something happens instead of every other. And that absolutely has value, but it's just way less. But like their stuff that each one of them brings is actually so much more impactful as a 10-man. Rogue definitely doesn't get brought. 3% atrophic poison is absolutely on the lower end. They would have to be super broken DPS wise, but it's certainly... So like there's two parts of this list. Like, it looks, I think, something like this with at least one Druid somewhere. I just don't know where it goes. I'm actually leaning healer, but then you'd have to play Holy. I don't think Disc and Resto play well together. I think you'd have to play Holy Priest and Resto Druid. Why is Rogue no value, but Pally high value if they're basically the same? So they're not basically the same. So Paladin gives you 3% DR on everything, and Rogue gives you 3% DR on, and actually with Shiv a little bit more, I think. But it's on specifically abilities cast or sourced to the boss, and that's just not consistent on raid fights. For example, Sludgefist, one of the hardest hitting bosses ever. I think Atrophic Poison would have only worked on... I think 25 to 30% of the boss's overall damage going out. So it's typically a lot less on an actual fight. So that's one thing. Number two, Paladin's utility in a 10-man, the value of one class bringing... They both bring an immunity. Bubble and Cloak are kind of equal in value. Bubble's more useful, but Cloak is up more often. So a little weird there. But Sack, Freedom, Bop. Like, Rogue just... has nothing to compare to that. So like on a 1-for-1, the Paladin and Rogue are not close in value they would bring to a 10-man. Disc and 10-man is insane. So much easier to cover the raid. You can cover like every damage event. Yeah, very true. True, I wasn't thinking about that. Why is Evoker locked in? I'm not positive on it, but I just think that it doesn't even have to be a DPS Evoker. It could be a healer too. Like Druid, there's two. Like, so like Druid and Evoker are definitely brought, I think, all the time. I just don't know which. Like, I just think in a 10-man, you'd probably mind game yourself into like pure throughput overall value early, and then the more experienced 10-mans would probably be like, okay, it's kind of nice to have the most tools at our disposal, and I can only imagine when you're strategizing a 10-man fight how absolutely fucking insane Zephyr, Rescue, and Time Spiral are, especially when you can't bring a bunch more of them. Same thing with Roars, even though, you know, you'd probably bring this for the buff anyway. Is 10-man rating coming in or what? No, this is just a thought experiment. Also, and kind of what this thought experiment is kind of proving is that 10-mans would actually require a scaling back of raid buffs or the ability to make a lot more of them work with scrolls, I think. That's what I think this is probably going to prove, and maybe already has. But I think it's fun to think about it either way. With no rogue and hunter. So, like, classes... classes that would fucking stink currently in 10-man. If we want to just list those. In my opinion, hunter loses crazy value. In my opinion, monk loses crazy value. It's funny, I don't think DK changes. In a way. Like, DK, it's so binary. Outside of the same tuning lottery that every other spec goes through, that I want to point out that DK's historically come out pretty ahead on. Like, if you've been a DK DPS for the past, like, 4 or 5 years especially, actually, you could honestly even go back, like, 10 years. There was, like, one 1 year stretch, I think, where they weren't very good for a while. But they've been, like, top tier as fuck DPS for a very long time. If you just choose a spec of DK. But I think Rogue falls off insane in this. Again, these are classes that could be brought if their tuning was great, if Monk was the best tank, right? Or if Rogue or Hunter was the best DPS. Also, Druid and Evoker, totally role dependent here. Like, so for example, if the tier required that you brought a Hunter or a Rogue because they were just so strong, first off, I think that's so unlikely because they'd have to be so much better than the other raid buffs or Warlock. You could put, like, Druid or Evoker as a healer or Druid as a tank. Do you not want Monk's Mystic Touch debuff? No, so that's interesting. So you can actually do this on your own. So go to your most recent log and actually check how much percentage of the damage that the boss is taking is physical. Because it's usually very low. Magic and physical are not built the same in this game. A lot of really good, strong melee DPS are actually mostly magic. So the classes that are, like, almost purely physical are Warrior and Hunter. And one of those classes, and maybe even Warrior, I slotted Warrior in there, but if you're only playing a DH and a Shaman, that's arguable, but you are sourcing like 5% of a couple people's entire DPS to yourself, which is really strong. It doesn't have the same value, though, that Mage does, where it's also buffing the healers, but that's why. So Monk was super irreplaceable last expansion, because Monk last expansion, and it's good they nerfed this because it was just way too strong, but they brought 5% physical damage. They brought 4% avoidance. That was a different kind of avoidance. It was sourced differently in the text, so it didn't actually DR with your own avoidance. So it was like non-DRable 4% avoidance, and also is 8% increased healing taken, which is I mean, it was probably the best raid buff. Like, monks brought more than anyone else, I think, in a raid. It was fucking insane. So Warlock is a good question. So Warlocks are... Certainly, if they were strong, they would be among the realm. Because, like, realistically, what you would do in making this decision is you would be looking at the buffs as a baseline, and then you'd be like, okay, now what does tuning look like for the last couple slots? Because when you're deciding between, it's not just what are the 10 best raid buffs, it's like what are, like, the required, like, they're so fucking good you have to bring, and that's really only like Havoc Demon Hunter, Priest, Druid, probably Evoker if you include all their tech in a 10-man, and probably Mage also, because Mass Barrier is just going to be absolutely fucking insane in a 10-man, on top of buffing the healers plus most likely a few DPS. However, if it was a melee heavy tier, like you ran all melee, like you definitely could swap Mage maybe. But then, like, spots 7 through 10 are a combination of how good their raid buff is plus their tuning. And DK, again, is the same. I don't think classes that would fucking stink currently in 10-man includes DK, because DK right now only need to be brought on fights with grips. And for some reason, blood DKs are better than DPS DKs at gripping. And then that would be the exact same in 10-man, right? You would just have to bring a DK when you need DKs. Nothing would change for them. It'd be the same as 20-man. It wouldn't be relatively worse or lower value. I mean, I guess it's technically lower value, right? Because, like, in a 20-man, even if you brought every single raid buff, you still have 5 raid spots. So DKs can simply just take one of those, where if you're bringing in a class for grips, you're, like, losing a raid buff in 10-man. So it actually is worse. I don't know why that wasn't working in my brain. absolutely is worse. That is correct. It's actually funny. Shaman is actually one of the most required buffs, right? Like Sky Fury, they went from having no raid buff to just having an insane raid buff that buffs everybody. Crazy. Not to mention that Shaman, if you're looking at a 10-man, dude, Shaman are like kind of the GOAT, right? Like they bring a bunch of stops. I mean, it's just like a Mythic Plus thing, right? Like a 10-man's like a bigger Mythic Plus dungeon. So classes that already have a ton of utility per the class you bring, Evoker, Shaman specifically, like they're obviously going to shine in a 10-man. They're going to like have every, like, dude, your class bringing really strong raid buff, Windrush Totem, forget the like niche Poison Dispel shit and like all that other stuff, but like just that good movement, root breaks. You also just need someone to press Lust. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have someone to press Lust, I think. Like, you have 3 Lust classes that look like they're in all the time, so. I think it would look something like this. Except this, you'd take Druid out. So what do 10-mans look like? Would be like this. And then this, let's move this over. Actually, 1, 2 tiles. Class that would fucking stink in 10-mans. Oh, I don't know why I did that. We can move it over 1, actually. And then, depends on spec, kinda. So that would just be Druid and Evoker. And these are, and Paladin. Warlock is, depends on tuning. Well, I mean, everything depends on tuning, but like Warlock's like right on the edge. Something like that. And then these classes would have to just overperform insane to make its way into a 10-man comp, in my opinion. Alright, that was fun. Also not really relevant, but if we learned anything from this, it's that if they were to ever reintroduce 10-mans, which I think is a super interesting concept, they would have to be extremely fucking easy where none of this matters. Or they would have to kind of re-look at the way raid buffs worked in the game, which is really interesting because I feel like we have been, you know, their response has been more and more like, okay, we'll just give you a raid buff now that you don't have one. Like in BFA, this is what this sheet was originally made for, right? In BFA, they were like, not everyone needs a raid buff. And then in Shadowlands, they're like, a couple more can get it. And then in Dragonflight, they're like, okay, if you don't have one, you need to get one now. And then the War Within actually removed a raid buff. So they've been like, it's progressed to this point, and it is worth mentioning though, in WoW's history, we've gone through the, one second, I gotta close my doors, big vacuum. In WoW's history, we've done this ebb and flow between like every class having super unique raid buffs to all of them being removed. That's happened in its entirety like twice now. So it's possible we actually rotate back to that again. It just kind of depends. I don't think so though, because I think they're like hard set on the class flavor for it, but yeah. And the reason why I said the other thing you'd have to do is to make it not matter is like currently there are raid guilds in Heroic that do AOTC. And I've asked Ian this question before where it was like, okay, now that like there's so many raid buffs, like, do you think that affects 10-mans? Because like 10-mans can't bring them all. Maybe they feel required. Like maybe there's someone in a 10-man out there that feels like they have to play a certain spec because it brings a raid buff instead of the one they want to play. Like what if your 10-man just has 3 hunters in it, or do you just want to whatever? And then he basically just said like, well, like we design Mythic Raid where you need all the raid buffs. We deliberately do not design Heroic that way. Like you can do all of Heroic without having optimal raid buffs. For that reason. So like I would think 10-mans would have to be that way too. Like currently with current raid buffs, unless they gave you scrolls or whatever, I think it would have to be super easy, or else you'd be making it for the top level groups again, and Crucible didn't go well, and that's basically what Crucible was. So you'd have to make it more accessible, and if you're making it more accessible, I don't think the raid buff thing will matter too much, because the idea is you'd probably be able to complete it no matter what your comp is. Max, what if they just made a talent tree for raid leaders to select the buffs and utilities, same as this idea for Mythic Plus 2? It's just too foreign to WoW. Like, anytime you start asking these questions of, like, what if they did this very specific thing that would only help your gameplay, Blizzard would immediately come back with, like, well, it doesn't make sense because, like, as a druid, we want you to log in and feel like you can give people Mark of the Wild, and then by doing that, you remove druids' class fantasy of what they do. And if you're a gameplay-only player, you're like, fuck it, all I care about is gameplay, and that's it. But, like, you have to realize that most of the people in WoW actually do care about stuff like that, even though it's not something I relate to. And Blizzard really cares about those people, and really, Blizzard really cares about... There's so many versions of that. Like, I think Trash and Raid is another big one. How massive raids are. The fact that you don't spawn next to a boss and that you have to fly back to the boss purely to experience how massive the raid is and how important it is to them that these raids feel gigantic and immersive. That's something that you don't think about because you're just a gameplay player, just like me. But that's something that a lot of WoW players actually do care about. And whether they do or not, Blizzard really thinks they do and really cares about that themselves, and that's the game they want to make, and that's the way it's going to be. Right? I think raid buffs are very, very similar to that. Like, pretty much every answer they've given about raid buffs has been that. The 10-man's, the most attractive thing of 10-man's, and there are negatives. Like, I don't think you'd be able to make as good of raid fights for 10-man as you would for 20. Like, I strongly feel like it would affect the integrity of raiding. But it is still worth entertaining the idea of 10-mans. And if you guys are joining late, we're not talking about 10-mans replacing 25. We're actually talking about them making more mini raids throughout an expansion, which they have said in an interview recently that they actually want to do, and they're thinking about it and maybe working on it. I'm saying that I think if they're going to do mini raids, that 10-man mythics are the best way to do that for a bunch of different reasons. We're not talking about it replacing 20-mans. Yeah, it was just an interesting conversation point, I guess. Max, would you prioritize DK for AMZ or Warlock for Hellstones? Oh, that's such a good point. I wasn't thinking about AMZ. So in a 10-man, DK's AMZ actually becomes like old AMZ. Like, you're realistically not going to hit the absorb cap in a 10-man. So, oh, that is a good question. Would you rather have AMZ or Hellstones? This is an interesting question. I think in high-level guilds, you'd actually want AMZ. And I think the closer you go to, like, less invested people who play the game for fun, not to be amazing at it, stuff like that, I think Hellstones would be better. I think that's the answer. Those two things are really similar in power level. It also would depend on the fight. There are fights where Hellstones are insane, and there are fights where AMZ is insane. There's fights where AMZ is terrible. There's fights where AMZ actually doesn't work, like Sludgefist. There are fights where Hellstones are amazing and Hellstones don't matter. So, like, the only problem I have with what I just said, too, is that I think the lower you go down in guild skill level, actually the least likely people are to use Hellstones, which would make AMZ better, but you could make the same argument for them using AMZ well. But I guess that's one person having to do something right instead of 20. But, like, there are fights where Hellstones are so good. Like, basically any fight, you have to look at points of lethality, right? So, like, what's actually killing you in a fight? A lot of times people will look at the amount of damage you're taking from things, but sometimes the thing that does the most damage to you isn't going to kill you. Sludgefist is a great example. If you look at a damage breakdown of Sludgefist, 70% of the damage is the ticking dot you take in the room, but that will never kill you, right? What will kill you is that making you too low. So it's the combination of that's why the healing comp in that fight was so interesting. The combination of hot throughput versus big burst healing when things can actually kill you. So it was like the dot combined with the roar, the dot combined like with the slam. The slam and the roar were such an overall low amount of the damage on the fight, but it was the thing that would actually kill you. So fights like that, Hellstones are insane because you don't. It's going to change every pull. If you're good with Hellstones, like, it changes every pull where you need it. Like, one pull you might need a Hellstone because you know how much damage this thing's going to do to you and you know what health you're at. Not a lot of fights are like that. Another really good Hellstone fight is fights that have really hard-hitting dots that rotate. So think like Forgotten Experiments if you guys are super old. Think of like Zymox from Castle Nathria. Fights where like you may not get this debuff every pull, but when you do, like, dear God, you need a personal and a Hellstone for it. Those are fights where Hellstones are like way more valuable than something like AMZ. But then not every fight is built like that. There's like different damage patterns where there's fights where Hellstones are so useless that we basically assign all of them at one point to work as a pseudo healing cooldown. That is the weakest version of Hellstone you can use. That's basically what you do when a fight doesn't need Hellstone, is you just make use of it somehow by doing that, because you can always find a way to just out-heal that scenario. But it's really hard to find a way to out-heal big personal dot or you not receiving RNG healing before a big damage hit. Sorry, I'm just yapping right now. It doesn't even matter what I'm saying. I have 2 things I need to do today. We have some interview questions that I think the interview's tomorrow. Don't hold me to that, though. I think the interview's tomorrow. And we need to kind of maybe not break down the amount of questions we have, but I need to kind of order at which point we're talking to them. And that also involves like ranking them, because I'm going to have to bounce them back and forth with Scott. And we're interviewing the Answerek devs, so we need to fill in some Answerek questions. So I want to do that. Plus, someone linked me a really cool video that I think would be fun to react to. It's this. The most broken state of every class in WoW's history, World of Warcraft. It's 36 minutes long, and I think it'd be really fun to guess before we're about to talk about them what that actually was, and then deliberate. I think that'd be insanely fucking fun. So those are probably what I'm going to do today, and then as soon as that's over, I'll immediately turn off my stream. Love that. Mages and rogues? No, you're not. You're misunderstanding. It's not like going through every raid and talking about what the most broken class was. It's going to talk about the most broken time for Feral Druid, for Shadow Priest, for specifically Assassination Rogue, I think. And that sounds really fun and cool. And I wonder how many of these they're going to get right. Because, to be honest with you, unless, I don't know who this person is, but unless this person, that's crazy, I don't know who this is, and they have 172k subscribers. What is their normal content?
Combat and world. There are a lot.
Okay, classic stuff. There we go. Okay, totally makes sense.
Combat and World of War. We've just about.
But it would take an absolute WoW historian to be able to accurately, like, it is part of my job to know how strong at least since I've been raid leading world first stuff, which has been like 8 years or so, or like top 5 world stuff. I've needed to know this, and we've, especially in the past, we stacked like 5 of these things. So it was so important that you knew what the best class was whenever. And even then, if you were to have me guess the most broken state of every class in WoW's history, I would come nowhere fucking close. I would have no idea. Like, I would come, like, basically me as a person, outside of the classes I've specifically played, and I know the answer of, like, when Monk was the most powerful and when Feral Druid was the most powerful. Those are classes I played, but, like, you're going to come nowhere. There's just too many classes in this game. You're gonna say what you think it is for Rogue, and then, like, some person will be like, oh, no, actually, back in this patch, this thing was super broken for 2 weeks, and it was like, you just can't know all this stuff. It's impossible, right? Like, I know Surrender to Madness Priest. I'm aware of that, right? But, like, you can get a few of them that are super obvious, but, like, really knowing is incredibly hard. Like, for example, for one person to make this video without reaching out to people, so just their own knowledge and getting all of these right to where, like, let's just say he does one for, like, Hunter and Affliction Lock and all that, and one person was to get every single one of them right without using outside sources and asking people, would be fucking incredible. Like, that sounds impossible for me to know. That would be such a random fact to just know as someone who kind of has to know this stuff for a living. Like, that would be insane. So the smartest thing to do would be if he reached out and actually asked people for their opinions. Like, hey, I know someone who's played Affliction Lock at a high level for 10 years. Tell me when the most broken Affliction Lock was. And then you get a really insightful answer. And that would be really cool. It's another video idea, actually, just asking people. Max, are we assuming that when it says broken, we means that in a good way and not broken as in unplayable? when people in WoW are talking about broken, they're almost always talking about strong. It means strong, and also the thumbnail has a picture of Shadow Priest doing what I'm assuming is Surrender to Madness nonsense. And that's like kind of famously one of the most overpowered specs ever, so I think that's what they're talking about. Yeah. All right, cool. So you guys need to help me. I don't know how I can have you guys vote on these. But basically, I need to like lead. I need to make sure that we get through all of this. All right, let me read to you so far some of the questions. And maybe give some feedback, I guess, on like if it's less good, and maybe I can move it down the list and get some good ones up at the front. I don't know if you necessarily need to lead with the best questions. You just need to make sure that they get included and that the questions kind of play off of each other. And we also need to mix in, we're talking to the, I don't know if it's the design lead, but he's more involved in overall fight design. This person is also a massive beast. Some fights they've created are like Fyrak, Sludgefist, Painsmith, Halandris. Like fucking bangers. The person that's like looking at the whole raid. And then the other person we're talking to is someone I've actually not spoken to before. Is the person who actually designed Ansurek. So two people, the Ansurek designer and like a super really fucking good boss designer who's maybe more in charge of the overall structure of the whole raid kind of thing. So we need to have questions for both. Really hard thing to do and bad thing you can do in interviews like this is just to like mainly ask questions to one person, because a lot of my interest is in actual like overall raid stuff, but you need to involve both the interviewers. You don't want one person to feel like they're not involved. And there's definitely a few specific questions about like bosses recently. Like I think one of these is for Ansurek, so we can kind of like maybe notate them as overall or Ansurek. So anyways, so I want them to introduce themselves, and because they're both boss designers, I think it'd be cool to immediately relate them to the audience and say like, hey, like, okay, what are your guys' names? Hey, I'm this guy, I'm Taylor, and the other guy. And then you're going to be like, okay, like, can you guys like let us know, like, you guys are boss designers. Like, can you give us some face to the names? Like, what are some bosses you guys have done that you're proud of? And I think each of them kind of listing some bosses that they've made will immediately, you as a viewer of this interview might, or a listener to this interview, might not relate to them as people because you've never met them before. But as soon as you have heard a boss that they have made, you have actually interacted with them more than you think, and it maybe helps you understand them a little better. So I think that's smart to do. Bro, we don't care about this interview this much. All right, fuck, I can just not stream. I'm down. It's just I like doing this kind of stuff on stream because it well, I would have to do this anyway, and I think it's also easy content. So you gotta be efficient, you know? But you're right, maybe I shouldn't do this on stream. Either way, okay, as a raid dev, how much are you involved with numbers tuning with your boss, or with bosses in general? Is it more collaborative, a higher up decision, or do you leave it to the original designer? So this, I think, was interesting this tier because there was in the race, there's so many questions about tuning, and I've always wanted to know, like, who is actually doing that. I think a lot of times they'll always back around to like it's a collaborative process, but I'd be interested to know with these two that we're talking about, like when we're talking about nerfing Ansurek, is the overall fight guy like kind of behind that? Do you guys have a nerf guy? Or like, is it, I don't know. That may not be, let me read some other questions. It may not be good to like lead with that. Here's another one. I have heard in interviews that it's hard to know what the Race World First guilds are capable of. If you guys are unaware, they've basically said this a lot in interviews, but like they don't have a dev team that is as good as Liquid and Echo. That's probably obvious. So a lot of times when they're creating bosses for the Race World First, they don't know, they have no way to test what is available to do beforehand. They, in their own words, kind of have to like get a decent idea of how something works and then crank it up and just kind of guess what we're capable of. Like, for example, they didn't know 3-second seeds were possible, and they saw us do that, and they saw us do it in one phase, and they're like, holy shit, I have no idea how they did that, but also P3 should definitely not have 3-second seeds for the whole thing. So, like, I just think hearing the people who are designing bosses, if your job is to make bosses, and you don't really know what the people who are going to do them are capable of, that has to be just a crazy feeling, either infuriating or an interesting challenge. And either way, I just think it would be fun to hear the people who make these bosses actually have to describe what that process is like and complain about it, or like whatever else they have to do. I just think that's like something that I think about constantly. But that's more like Race World First specific, so I can definitely throw that near the end though. Let's read some other ones and then I'll get some feedback from you guys. So describe the process or struggle as a designer from making a very cool mechanic like explosive dosage and trying to have it not be dominated by a weak aura solution. Do you find that weak auras limit your ability to create cool fights and mechanics? That's a fucking turbo banger. I don't know if that needs to be at the beginning, because I actually don't want to start with weak aura private aura stuff, but like if you're a designer, like imagine this. Imagine your job is to create cool fights. Imagine how fucking annoying weak auras have to be. Like, just imagine you create this goat mechanic, and then you have to ask yourself at every turn, wait, can this be solved with weak auras? And this mechanic actually doesn't end up being fun. It actually just becomes insufferable, and you're not even progressing the fight. You're progressing a weak aura. That has to be so hard, right? So I think it's a good question. I don't want to lead with it, though. So maybe where it is okay. Private auras didn't seem to have much of a negative impact this raid compared to Amirdrasil and Aberrus. Are you happy with the current state of private auras as a solution to some weak aura heavy mechanics? Straight into the point, all of that is true. That can also probably be closer to the weak aura question. I think these two should go together, for sure. Although these are all general questions, so we need to fit in some general. And you know what let's do? At the beginning of every question, let's label the two interviewers as A for Ansarek and G for general, like generally everything, and or both. And I want to make sure we're involving both people. So at the beginning, we have both in all caps. As a raid dev, how much? Okay, I think that's also kind of both, because I think this is going to involve, we're speaking to an individual fight designer and also I believe his superior, maybe not his superior, but I believe his superior. So like hearing from both of them would be super interesting there, but also that would maybe take a long time. Ask about PvP. That's good. PvE fight designers. Let's just add that in the middle. So what about the current state of PvP in WoW? Let's just fucking get into it. Well, I don't work on that. Cool. That'd be like asking him about store mounts. That'd be hype. Okay. I've heard in interviews that it's hard to know what the Race World First guilds are capable of. Can you describe the process and or struggle of watching the race and determining whether a boss is killable or fair? I think this would be great for the Ansarek dev, because I don't know. Everyone was asking. I'm just going to make this up, but by post-race viewing Reddit and listening to our casters and Echo's casters and Methods casters, I would say maybe 70 to 80% of the community was sure that Ansarek not only needed to be nerfed to be killable at all, but they also were saying that they needed to do it like quickly. Like they have to do it quickly or else like it doesn't benefit us. Like we are getting fucked by that. Kind of similar to like Ashara. So imagine you're the Ansarek designer. You're the person who's seeing all this. 80% of the community thinks that this boss isn't killable, and not only that, but I have to nerf it now. And if I don't nerf it, then it will benefit some teams rather than others. You know, that has to be insane, right? How long is the interview? Hopefully longer than 30 minutes. They're scheduled for 30 minutes, but usually I can social engineer my way into asking like an extra couple questions. And they're usually, my last couple interviews with Ian and Morgan have been 40 minutes. Okay, this would be the everything guy, or general. Let's do G for that one. Oop, that's the wrong one. Is it today? I don't think so. Didn't you get told to not do that last time? I mean, yeah, so they have like multiple people in the call. They have like a PR person. It's a big company, right? So they have a PR person, they have the community manager, and they have the people you're interviewing. And the PR person is always like, you were going to do this for 30 minutes. You have something to go to. You got to do this. And then the community manager and the person interviewing would gladly continue talking because they find this process interesting as well. So you usually just have to tell the PR person to like relax and get over it, and they can get mad at me and I don't care. And then we just keep fucking going. So yeah, I didn't get told not to do it. I wasn't told stop doing this. It's just every time they're like, oh, this is going too long. And I'm just like, dude, just fucking shut up. Just let this happen. Go get like a cookie or something. All right. Let's see. Private auras didn't seem to have much of a negative impact this raid compared to Amir Drasil and Abra. So this is just two general questions for the general guy. Yurt. There was a meme sent last time. Max, I'm curious about a general question as per designing a fight for a specific class. I think we ask that later. Let's continue. This is also one for the guy, the main guy. Last raid, there was a massive wall at Tindril, and in an interview, Morgan and Ian seemed to imply that not only was Tindril maybe a little bit too hard for too long, but it could have been an undertuning problem for Smolder on Naimu and Laredar. That also contributed. Same things seem to have happened this raid from Rashanan to Brood Twister. So the question would be, how do you determine or qualify the difficulty of encounters when creating them, and how do you plan a difficulty curve for the raid? That's definitely a general. So I'm just going to mark it as general for now, and we'll do the moving around later because we need to get the Ansrek guy involved. Max, don't need to say negative, do you? They probably don't look at them as negative. Oh, good point. Private auras didn't seem to have much of a negative impact this raid compared. Well, they do view them as negative, right? So they're doing that by their actions. So clearly everything that got involved, they've said this as much in interviews, but like all the map stuff on Neltharion and all of the like private aura macro stuff on Fyrakk, do you think it's an accident that there was none of that in this raid? It is obviously something that they have moved past, and they are extremely aware that those things were a negative impact for the community. That is true. So I think there's a level of maybe changing your verbiage a little bit, but I also think there's importance in like just fucking saying it how it is. You know, because they're not babies. Okay. This raid was much more linear than the wing style raids we've had since Nyaloth and Nathria. Does this help create a better difficulty curve in theory, or is it trying something new? This is a pretty back burner question. It's like, this is a fucking back burner question. This is just all the way at the bottom. Okay, moving on. When I spent a few hours at Blizzard, I was able to... Oh, this is my favorite question, but I think I might put this near the end because I don't think this is as close as community facing. But when I spent a few hours at Blizzard, I was able to talk to a few designers, and the thing that I found the most cool, let's say interesting, was they said about 70% of the SOTHE stuff that they do is assigned to them or is their job, and they have a lot of leeway to just make really cool stuff that they find fun. Is there anything like this as raid designers that you have made or done that qualifies as something you made just because you thought it was awesome? This is going to be my favorite question of the whole interview, but I also think it is less current events and interesting for the community. So I do think we put it at the bottom, but I really, really like it. Make the designers seem human. Dude, when I was at Blizzard, I've told this a few times, so I apologize if you've heard this again. But are you guys familiar with all the secrets in the game? Like, there's like a secret finding Discord. And like, there's people that like, not, maybe they do play the game for just that reason, but they get super involved in like actually figuring out the secrets they put in every patch. Do you know that that's not someone's job and never was? Like, that was never given to someone as a task. Someone who works at Blizzard that did something else was just like, I think this is really fucking cool, and just started doing it. And there's tons of stuff in the game like that. And to me, that is so much cooler than being tasked to do it. Like, basically, that person would have just been one of the people in the secret finding Discord because they thought it was so cool, and just as a passion project on top of his job, he just did that, which is awesome. Right? And then there are people who slander all the developers and don't treat them as humans, and it's great. I fucking love the gaming community. All right. How much emphasis do they place on accessibility? How much emphasis do you place on accessibility versus design? Where we end up with green on green, red on red, etc. Mechanics that are somewhat hard to see, but fit in thematically with the rest of the encounter. Banger. Huge banger. That is also, unfortunately, a general question, though, so we are going to have to fit in some answer-ec ones. Max needs an emote for when he tells the same story twice. Oh, no, that would tilt me. Dude, every time I'm telling a story, it's weird because, like right now, I don't even know how many viewers I have right now. It's probably not a lot. Okay, I have 2,000 viewers. So, if there are 2,000 people in here, I think a lot of the times you're watching, you're like, oh, the same 2,000. I watched the stream the whole time, so it's probably the same 2,000 people. Like, if let's just say I sustain 2,000 or 3,000 viewers for the next couple hours, there would probably be like 20,000 plus people that come through my stream. So, like, sometimes even if you're repeat answering something, you are actually answering a genuine question from someone. They just missed it. And then also, maybe a couple thousand of those people didn't watch 6 months ago, the last time I told that story, but you did. So you're hearing it again. So it does make sense why you repeat things as a streamer, but I do understand that. But dude, if you started doing an emote from when I was doing that, I would actually tilt completely sideways, I think. All right. This is definitely a general question. Oh. As someone overseeing the overall raid design, with DK's raid buff involving needing things to be gripped, do you make sure that there are enough of those bosses in a raid, and do you consider that on end bosses more than others? So that's good. Another side question I would love to ask than this is, okay, if that's so, why do blood DKs grip things significantly better than DPS DKs do? But unfortunately, that would be like me asking them about store mounts, because that's not their job. And I've asked Ian and Morgan that over and over again, and they always kind of just brush it off. What are your thoughts on generative AI? And do you see it having a meaningful role in the design of future raid bosses or the broader game world? Are there aspects of boss design, such as encounter mechanics or visual aesthetics, where you feel AI might enhance or streamline the creative process for your team? Definitely a general question. I think I added some answer questions at the end. That's a skip. I think it might be a skip because I don't know if they would be qualified to answer that. But I think it is fascinating to think about. Like, think about, you've been given an idea for a boss. And you're like, okay, I'm thinking of like a few different starting points. But like, just imagine you just feed an AI every single raid boss that's ever been made in WoW. And then ask it to just create 10 basic designs of raid fights to just pick a concept or a theory of and be like, oh, that's a super fucking good idea. And that could literally just save you time. You're going to create the boss. It's not creating the boss for you. It's setting a baseline. I think that could absolutely be sick. Right? What is it? Yeah, it feels like a gotcha question and people would hate on them if they said yes. I why would people hate on that? That is the smart way. The thing that people hate on AI is that they're replacing like people or jobs or like removing an industry. This would do nothing in that case. Exactly what I'm talking about in this case is something that you're using to just make all of their jobs more efficient, which I guess technically could remove people, right? If all of them work 50% more efficiently, not what I'm suggesting here. Like, do you need as many raid designers, whatever? But what is it? People turbo hate all kinds of generative AI in game dev. It's not rational. Oh. Okay. So you think that this is actually a good question, but because it's like a buzzword and some people get super mad at it, just removing it might just be smart for now? I could 100% see that. I could totally see that. We could just remove that. Fuck it. Removed. Okay. Is there an optimal amount of bosses in a raid, in your opinion, that promotes a good difficulty curve? Oh, we actually, I can remove this because this is another difficulty curve question, which I think difficulty curve is a topic that needs to be covered after Amir Drasil and then Nerebar Palace in a row, but not 3 times, probably not 2 times. And also, recently, Ian actually addressed the 10 bosses versus 8 thing in another interview. So I think we can completely remove that. Thoughts on a tier 11 style raid with the same 8 to 12 bosses, but just split up into 2 to 3 raids instead of 1? That is good because that will maybe help clarify. Actually, I think you rewrite this question. Let's write them next to each other and see which is better. Ian, in a recent interview, seemed to indicate that you guys were interested in more smaller Nixia's lair kind of raids. To clarify, is this more the tier 11 2 to 3 raids released, but basically the same tier, or individual raids released in 0.5 or 0.7 patches, similar to Crucible or there's other examples of that, right? Halls of Valor plus Emerald Nightmare. Those were released separately. Yeah, I guess, I mean, that is another example. You could release them first. I highly doubt that, though. What is it? Problem with splitting raids into separate smaller raids is that it requires 3 times as much more art to do. Yeah, I had that exact same argument earlier. I assume that's the issue, which is why I think it's interesting what they're actually referring to. Crucible of Storms. People might not know what tier 11 is. Maybe call it by name. It just recently happened in Kata. But I could clarify it for them, but I imagine they know what that is. I think I like this one better. I like the second answer better. And that is a general. So we may have to move it back, but okay. Has there ever been a fight they design where the design solution for a mechanic is way different than how the community solves it? If yes, give an example. That is absolutely a both. And it's a good question, I think. Is there a tight line between finding a good balance for the race and the average player when it comes to tuning and when to do it? That is a good question. It is for both, for sure. And I think it goes earlier with the other tuning question. Okay, then we're getting like less great questions here, I think. Do you ever design fight profiles, meaning like the type of damage that's going out or the type of damage the boss requires, 2 to 4 target, spread and stacked, to highlight certain specs who are powerful in niche ways? This is a back burner question. Could be for both as well. I think I'll probably reorder that and put it later. Has there ever been a boss mechanic they conceptualized and thought would be awesome, but had to cut because of technical limitations? That's a good question. Probably also later. Do they design raid bosses with mythic in mind, or do they start from normal first and then work your way up? I love this question. I love this question. Could be for either, I guess. Not both. There seems to be less percentage-based push bosses in the last few raids, especially since Sanctum of Domination, where there were a few cases of stopping DPS for a long time to wait for cooldowns. Is this something you guys think about on a boss, and is there still room for a cool way to have a health percentage based push on a hard boss? Like, if you guys notice how they do it since Sanctum of Domination, is they usually do timed based phases. This is true on like almost every hard boss, besides very, very few. Or they are time-based phases that have a health percentage threshold that is usually not met on progression, but it is meant so you don't just kill a boss in P1. That usually comes to be a problem later. Okay, what's your favorite boss that you made? That's a quick one at the end, sure. This raid was much more linear than the wing style raids. Yeah, those are quick ones at the end for sure. Okay, Ansarek questions. Did you at any point in the race think Ansarek might need to get nerfed? So I think instead of asking that, you maybe add that at the end and give it to the Ansarek guy. I have heard in interviews that it's hard to know what the race world first skills are capable of. Can you describe the process and or struggle of watching the race and determining whether a boss is killable or fair? And then you actually just add that later. So I'll ask you, whatever, I forget his name. Did you think at any point in the race that Ansarek might need to get nerfed? And then you just give that to the Ansarek guy. Cool. That solves that. Okay. And then another Ansarek question. Great. So the root mechanic on this fight made certain races and classes very valuable. Tindral had a similar mechanic that found another way to punish you if you broke the roots. What line of thinking made you land on the version of roots we got on Ansarek versus Tindral? Would it have been too punishing to not allow you to root break it, basically? I don't know if I like that one as much. It's like so specific. I feel like no matter what the answer to this is just not very consequential. Fuck, we might have to come up with some better Ansarek questions. Yeah, that question fucking sucks. All right. Any Ansarek questions, actually? Does anyone have any questions about how Ansarek was designed specifically? I have a meme question. But it's like a meme, so it wouldn't be super important. Like, we specifically need more at the beginning. Like, worst case scenario is I'm asking a bunch of general raid design questions, and then that guy feels left out. A few of your earlier questions are tangentially related. Yeah, let me read the old ones and see if I can get them together here. So, oh, this one. Is there a tight line between finding good balance for the race and the average player when it comes to tuning and when to do it? That could be added here. Right after this. Cool. Okay, that removes that up. You might be able to remix some and specifically mention Ansarek, for example. Oh, yeah, some of the boths. Okay. Or maybe some of the generals. Let's see. So general, I think, really could be either here, actually. Do you think that's good in an interview, by the way? Like you're interviewing two people, but you don't actually know which one will have the best answer or really wants to answer. So does it actually make sense in an interview to throw the question to either of them and then have one of them be like, oh, I have a good answer here? Or do you think you actually should direct every question at a specific person? What do you guys think? Or can both exist? I think it definitely can exist. They'll know who has the better answer. Yeah, that's what I feel like. Then that makes this way less strict, and I can actually... Yeah, I like that. And then I'll ask you guys if there's any questions I think we missed, but I just want to make sure that we have some... Oh, I guess, dude, I think this can be after too. Yeah, I don't like opening with that. Definitely like this. This is definitely a general question. This is a general question. Okay, we need to mix up these general. This is definitely a general overall raid question. This is definitely a general overall raid question. This is like the pinnacle. You're literally speaking about the raid as a whole. And Scott had a question I think he wanted to ask. Actually... Okay, so here's what Scott wants to ask. A lot of our players looking back on this race have said that web blades on Ansurek is the hardest mechanic of all time on a boss, which is interesting because in a vacuum it seems fairly simple. How much time is spent on finding the most difficult yet possible times in the fight for a mechanic like web blades to spawn? That's a great fucking question. And we can add that for Ansurek. When should we add that among the other questions? One second. Max, I really appreciate how much thought you are giving this interview, but realistically, you have a 30 to 45 minute interview. Each question will take 1 to 2 minutes to ask and then 4 to 6 minutes to answer. I very much recommend getting your top 6 questions, then you have extra questions set aside. Oh boy, have I been on both sides of what you're just saying right now. So the very first interview I prepared for was with Ian, and I prepared a million questions because I didn't really know what I was doing. And we went through like 5 of them, just like you're saying. So then I learned, and then we did an interview with Morgan. So I created like 5 really good questions, and I created 7 or 8 just in case we ran out of time. I went through all 8 of them in 18 minutes, and then I just fucking YOLO'd the last 10 minutes of the interview, which, by the way, ended up being really good. But you never know how many questions you're going to go through, but your idea of like making sure the more important ones actually get in are super good, especially because it's a 2-person interview, and 2-person interviews always have the chance of having a question be answered and then the other interviewee actually coming in with more context, which lengthens every answer almost by design. So you are right. But also, I'm a fucking professional. Respect me. Or blow up. Okay, so the Scott question. A lot of our players looking back on this race world first said that, okay, so we open the interview. No, I think we have to actually ask. I want to ask a good general question first. I think we lead with difficulty curve. Don't you guys think that's the elephant in the room? I think we lead with difficulty curve. Okay. Then see if there's any other stuff here. And then Scott's going to ask a answer question. A lot of our players looking back at the race world first. So this is Scott. I want to make sure Scott and I bounce back and forth too. But how much time is spent on finding the most difficult yet possible times in the fight? Wait, how the fuck am I going to stream this? So I just realized that I have like some interview thing. And it's just a display capture and then me. And then I just full screen his face on Zoom and I just talk to them. But there's going to be 2 designers and Scott's going to be on stream. So I'm assuming what we do, set up scenes. Nah, I don't want to do that. Maybe like I just do this and I just make my camera a quarter of the screen. And then I just set up the zoom to just, can you set up zoom to be a box? So it's like me, right? Me down here, and then it's like Morgan Day, or not Morgan Day. It's Ray Designer Guy, Scott. Is that easy? It's cursed, but like, maybe I'll leak the zoom if I do that. Max, are you wearing your liquid jersey tomorrow? Gotta stay out of trouble. Oh, good shout. I live my whole life trying not to get yelled at. All right, anyways, I'll make my camera smaller here. There we go. Potty C setup. Dude, if you have any idea how complicated the Potty C setup is and I don't know how to use it. Okay. Okay, so maybe I could ask after this. Just straight up to the Anseret guy. It's kind of related. And if he does answer it by just expanding on this, you could set it up very easily, probably. Yeah, but they're not going to join the thing. Like, it's being done on Zoom. Like, I don't know. Can you describe the process and or struggle of watching the race and determining whether a boss is killable or fair? Did you at any point in the racing Ansric might need to get nerfed? Okay, let's look at Scott's next question. Scott's question is, some crazy overlaps like liquefy, frothing toxin, web blades, wave dodging occur in P1 and in P3 web blades during portal places and taking their portal with web blades. What is the testing process used to ensure that these insane overlaps are actually possible? That's a good question. That's kind of the same as the race world first thing. What testing? Oh, they tested. Yeah. For interviews, it's hard to know what the race world first skills are capable of. Can you describe the process and or struggle of watching the race and determining whether boss is killable or fair? I think this is just a better version. Than the other question. Maybe you could ask, like... Let me message this to Scott. Well, I'll work with that with him. Maybe add Scott's question as an example there. Okay, so like... It's like basically the question you want to add on to this in some way is what processes take place to know that some of these mechanic overlaps are possible. And then like maybe give an example, but it's already kind of long. It's already long. So like maybe I've heard in interviews that it's hard to know what the race world first guilds are capable of. That's true, but like maybe not a good starter. No, I think it's just better to remove that. Can you describe the process and or struggle of watching the race and determining whether a boss is killable or fair? Then you remove this, go later. What process take place to know that some of these mechanic overlaps are possible? Like web blades, what's his thing? Web blades plus liquefy plus frothing toxin plus wave dodging at the same time. No, and then did you think at any point in this race Ansarek might need to get nerfed? No, I think the example is kind of not needed. No, yeah, I mean, actually, the example is needed because, like, it is too general. Are possible. An example would be, like, web blades plus liquefy plus frothing toxin plus wave dodging at the same time. Did you at any point, and then also to add to that, did you at any point in the race think Ansarek might need to get nerfed? Because Ansarek famously not nerfed. Actually, it kind of did in a cheeky way. Do you remember when they nerfed the condemnations or whatever, the shackles? They also changed a spell script to make the time after the last ring a little bit longer. So they did actually nerf the enrage a little bit, which didn't end up mattering. We would have beat it anyway. We did so much damage on our kill, but I want to see if they mentioned that or if they how close they were to like numerically nerf, like how confident were they that we were going to kill it. So Scott kind of wants to ask this question. So I can give Scott this question and I can just throw one of mine in between, or I can just let Scott go twice in a row, which also is probably fine. And then let me read the rest of Scott's question. Cool. So Scott will ask these. Who is Scott? Scott is the co-GM and a tank in this guild. Where's my Yeah. Yo, Hall of Fame fills tonight, end of Hall of Fame watch party. I don't care. Then I can just ask right after this. Sure. Max. Let's look at Scott's last question. Make sure we get it in. So he had those two, and then he had one more. Scott said, this raid had two bosses that were immediately identified by ourselves as one tankable. We knew Kaiveza was going into Mythic, although we waited to do it until we knew we needed it for damage. And Silken Court. Both of these have now been fixed when designing... Both of these have now been fixed, but when designing a raid as a one-tank fight, something you'd ever seek to make or enable. I honestly think that's, like, kind of back burner. That's a pretty low tier one. Because I think the answer is, like, obviously no. I'll put that near the end here. It's like definitely not this back burner. Probably right behind this. This is a G, and we'll figure out who's asking it in a second. Okay, so I'm asking, is there a tight line when finding good balance for the race and an average player when it comes to tuning and when to do it? I think the answer to this is just yes, but is them elaborating on this interesting? Let's see if we can find a better one to go here. Oh, maybe I could combine these. So as a raid developer, how much are you involved with the numbers tuning with your bosses and bosses? Is it more collaborative, a higher up decision, or do you leave it to the original designer? They don't really care about balance? Bad question. Huh? They are involved. They're the people doing it. I mean, they have to care about it. How do you find the line? How do you find the line? Bad question was to the one tank question. Yeah, I agree. How do you find the line between finding a good balance for the race and the average player when it comes to tuning and when to do it? I still don't feel like that's super good because like I feel like the answer is like we make it hard initially the last few bosses and then we nerf it and there's like a scaling raid buff thing. Like I actually feel like they did that pretty well this time outside of Brew Twister being too hard right away. I'd agree more with them caring less about class balance. Yeah, there's a reason I'm not asking them about class balance because that's not their job. As a raid dev, how much are you involved? Actually, I did ask them one question with class design, but it did... Where is it? Like here, like... They don't decide DK's raid buff. But do you make raid fights? When you're making raid fights, do you think about making a certain amount of them want to make use of, like, grip, for example? Or, like, rescue. Stuff like that. Like, I think that is a class design question that is given to them in, like, how do you deal with that kind of thing, which I think is good. Have you ever interviewed someone who deals with numerical tuning? Tomorrow, these two people, right? All right, let's go. Let's read. Let's make sure we get some bangers right off the bat. So I think the tuning one is good. And then as a follow-up, maybe. And then follow-up after that is this. Okay. Then I can have Scott ask this question. Describe the process of the struggle as a designer for making a very cool mechanic like explosive dosage and trying to have it not be dominated by the weak aura solution. Do you find that weak auras limit your ability to create cool fights and mechanics? Okay. Cool. That works. I think you're right. Private auras didn't seem to have much of a negative impact this raid. A better way to say that is private auras didn't seem to like, or private auras were pretty much unnoticeable this raid. It just removes the, someone was mentioning this earlier, but it removes the default feeling. It's just saying the same thing and it's also true, and I don't know. Some of these questions were leading the witness, like the weak aura question. Describe the process to, or the struggles of designer for making a very cool mechanic like explosive dosage and trying not to have it be dominated by a weak aura solution. So that's very targeted and a direct thing. But asking them, do you find that weak auras limit your ability to create cool fights and mechanics? I think the answer to this has to be yes. Like if you're a fight designer, it has to be annoying, but I also want to give them a chance to talk about that, right? Like what is it like doing that? Like is it part of your process to go back and be like, and I feel like this is the only way really to get them to talk about that. Like maybe you could ask something more direct, like, Has there ever been a great mechanic you've made and you've been like, damn, like weak auras are going to make this not very cool and change your approach, maybe? I guess ask how instead of do, so they don't just say yes. Max, don't cut questions just because you think you already know the answer. Really, if you have to cut down an interview to fill in with a certain amount of time, or you try to prioritize them so the most important questions get asked first, you don't think it's a negative to some questions that we almost certainly know the answer? Isn't the cool questions the ones where it's insight that we have not heard before? Like that's kind of the, like I'm not saying it makes the question not askable, but it certainly makes it less valuable. Yeah, I think that there is a better way to ask this question. I'm just trying to think about it. That's why I'm not talking. Nah, I don't know how to change it. Fuck. Do you? Oh, yeah. Do you have an example where weak auras have limited your ability to create cool mechanics or fights? Yeah, sure. I'll just copy that. W. I'll just leave it at that. Fuck it. Scott's asking it anyway, so if it's a bad question, it's on him. W me. L him. Private auras. Went by pretty unnoticed this raid compared to Amir Drasil and Aberys. Unnoticed by the community, which is true. This raid compared to Amir Drasil and Aberys. Are you happy with the current state of private auras as a solution to some weak aura heavy mechanics? It's a fine question. I can add that. I can ask that. How much emphasis do you place on accessibility versus design? Oh, that's a banger. I'll add that as well. I'll just give the banger to me. W me. I'll have Scott ask this because I think he might add something about Blood DK. Oh, I like this. This is definitely in the back burner territory. This could also be to either. This could be to either also. In a recent interview, seemed to indicate that you guys were interested in a more smaller Nyxia's layer kind of raid. To clarify, this is more the tier 11. To clarify, is this more the tier 11 2 to 3 raids released, but basically the same tier, or individual raids released 7.5 or 0.7, similar to Crucible? That's definitely a back burner because I think they're going to be like, we can't say what we're going to do. Even though what you could get is like, I think this would be cool. But they're also probably trained to not do that because then it develops expectations and stuff. I don't think they have all the info on those yet. Oh, interesting. On the contrary, I think that's not true. When Ian talked about that, the way he answered that question was not like we're thinking about doing this. It is like we are definitely already working on doing this. Like they're already working on stuff that's coming out in the, or very soon they'll be working on stuff that's coming out in the 0.2 of this expansion. And him responding that clearly about it tells me that they're definitely already working on it or about to. And then if they're about to, they would know kind of how they were going to implement it. But also, it'd be interesting to know the answer either way. Okay. This is one that I love. I'll let Scott ask this one. This raid has 2 bosses that were immediately identified by ourselves as one tankable. He also wants to add that. Although I don't think that question's very good, but he wants to ask it. So W him. These are backburners. Backburners. Oh, I love this question. I want to ask this earlier. That needs to be moved up. It's definitely better than this question, too. This one's actually... Let's move this shit back. Oh, I just deleted that. Wait. W. Undeleted it. W me. This one is like, I think, backburner. Okay. Either here, and this goes after... Or here. This is max. W me. Do you ever design raid profiles like the type of damage that is going out, or the type of damage boss requires? That's backburner. Any more non-backburners that are here? There seems to be less percentage-based push bosses in the last few raids, especially since that's backburner. Oh, I don't know. Do you guys think this is non-backburner? Though when I spent a few hours at Blizzard, I was able to talk to a few designers, and the thing that I found the most interesting was they said about 70% of the stuff they did was assigned to them or is their job, and they have a lot of leeway to just make really cool shit that they find fun. I would probably say stuff and not shit. Is there anything like this as raid designers that you have made or done that qualifies as something you just thought was awesome? As something you made that you just thought was awesome? I love that question. Especially, it's just super relatable, too. That's got to be before the one tank thing. I'm throwing this in. And I'm asking it myself, W me. That sounds like an end of interview. Yeah, but it's got to be better than the one tank thing. Like, both of these have now been fixed, but when designing a raid, is a one tank fight something you'd ever seek to make or enable? I think the answer to this is absolutely no. Like, they want every raid to be 4 healed and 2 tanked. Really emphasis on the 2 tanked. They hate 3 tanking, they hate 1 tanking. Do you ever design fight profiles like the type of damage is going at? Yep. Niche question. Niche question. Niche question. Niche question. And then just quick ones. What was the favorite boss you've ever made? That's kind of nice, but it's certainly not super important. This raid is much more linear in the wing style. Yep. And then this is removed. Generative AI. Okay, so I think it's just some shit like this. We can give Scott this one. And let's just go ahead and ask a few of these. Oh, that's 3 in a row for me. I'll let Scott give some feedback on this. There we go. I'll just post this to Scott. Let me know if you want to make any changes. All right, cool. www. We're done. Cool. That's going to happen tomorrow, I think. It's either tomorrow or the day after. I will know tomorrow morning when... Know what time? Certainly not. Okay, so we're going to react to a video, and it's gonna be really fun. And I'm gonna eat during it because that's efficient. So, the video is called "The Most Broken State of Every Class in WoW's History." And when we're about to talk about the class, we are going to guess as a group. So hopefully no pre-watchers, but...
We've just about...
And that's so loud. Okay, let me go heat up my food. boys. It's time. What are you? I'm eating miso glazed salmon, green beans, shredded cabbage, and white rice. And then I'm gonna blow up. All right. Max, thoughts on changing DK's Horn of Winter back to its Wrath version for a raid buff? Yeah, I mean, I've been saying this for years, but like, I don't understand why we have to do the like beat around the bush. Well, shamans have a raid buff, but it's only enhanced, and it's because of Wind Fury, and it's kind of based on tuning. And no, just give them a, hey man, like 2 classes don't have a raid buff, like fucking give them one, right? Like same thing with DKs. Oh well, DKs actually have a raid buff because you always need someone in your group with a grip. That's true, but it's sometimes not true, and it's like frustrating because one tank does it better than the others, which wouldn't be solved by giving them both a raid buff because it would just always be blood DK. But yeah, I mean, fuck it, why not? Like, just make it. Yeah, sure. All right.
20 years of patches, updates and changes, every single class, new or old in World of Warcraft, has undergone so many changes that they are unrecognizable from how they were day one. Whether it's due to the new abilities, talent reworks, balancing updates, PvP changes, or anything in between. Whatever your main is, it's had one massive journey over the years to reach where it is today. But when was your class at their best? When were they the most broken, the most overpowered? If you could pick one patch or update that Blizzard did that truly made your
such a good video idea. I would bet every single dollar that I have that he and no one else could make this video and get it right without spending a ton of time talking to a ton of people and coming to a general consensus. Not because some of the answers aren't going to be contested. Like, for example, I don't know if Monk, the Windwalker Monk in Antorus was the best class in the game by like 8% DPS. It was insane. The MDI was like triple Windwalker. It was fucking crazy. Right? But like, I don't know if it was better than what Windwalker was in Throne of Thunder when they used Rune of Reorigination and had Tiger Eye Brew and used Tiger Eye Brew with 1,000,000 mastery, got a 400+% damage buff, and then got all of their haste and crit back. You know? Like, I'm pretty sure it was better then, but it was only for like half a patch, then they changed their mastery forever, and like, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one of those two things was stronger. And I was super involved in it. So like, there's that. But like, there's just too much information for one person to get right without sourcing 1,000,000 different people, so...
into an unstoppable machine. When would that be? Well, that's what I'm going to be trying to answer today. One state of every class.
Oh, one funny thing is that technically the answer to when were tanks the best, it's going to be Mop for every single one of them because of Vengeance, which is kind of a bad... you just shouldn't look at it that way. It should be relative to like other tanks in the content.
And they were...
When was the strongest time for Brewmaster? I'm pretty sure it was Blackrock Foundry. I want to say in Blackrock Foundry they were so much better than any other tank that it wasn't like it was you just couldn't play anything else. But they were like the best tank for a lot of other raids, but BFA, just like all of BFA. I mean, they weren't the best tank in Uldir. They were the most commonly played tank, but they weren't the best. They were the best in Eternal Palace by a lot. Eternal Palace might be the closest. But that was mostly because they just did the most damage because of some essence stuff, but I mean, that matters. Wasn't Prot Warrior, like, equally good? In Eternal Palace? No. Right, let's keep going.
Most powerful ever. I do have some rules here as well. I'm not going to be covering exploits as they can often be non-class specific. I'm also not going to be covering bugs as they were never intended ways to play the game. I'm looking for updates that Blizzard implemented. They checked them out on the PTR. They put them in the game. They said, yep, this looks fine. And then
Yeah, so the answer to Shadow Priest will be Surrender to
They
Madness, by
either
the way.
had to nerf them fast, or in some cases they just stayed overpowered for a very long time. And these can also be PvP or PvE related. And I
Oh,
wanted
whoa! Okay, if they're PvP related, then this is going to be way, way off. Let's see how important he takes that, because that's a totally different game. Literally two completely different games. So...
do honorable mentions for pretty much every class here, but as you can tell from the length of the video, there was already enough to say, and I'm just going to do my best to cover one thing per class. If anything, there'll be a lot of comments with people remembering different states of their class and the moment in time that they would have picked for when they were the best.
Yep.
So definitely let me know what you think, and
Yep.
I'm always up for
This is... Some of them are objective, but a lot of them are probably subjective.
doing a part 2. With all that said, this for me is the most broken and overpowered state of every class in World of Warcraft over its 20-year history. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform that...
I know you'll say Disc was the best in Uldir, but Disc was literally busted in MoP with Old Spirit Shell. So Disc... You're talking about two different things. So Disc was insane in Uldir, but it wasn't because of healing. They were a fine healer. They just did like legit like 70% of a DPS's damage. Like it was the most broken. It was the most broken fucking healer damage ever. But what you're referring to in MoP was their ability to heal. So you're kind of saying like whether you're going to say which was the most broken a healer ever was, like pound for pound, if you care about healer damage, so like Race to World First stuff, probably the most powerful a healer ever was Disc and Uldir. But that was because of its damage. But like, if you don't care about that as much, or you're focusing specifically if healing is your primary focus, then that wasn't true. That's absolutely not true about healing.
Dedicated to teaching back-end web development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages. It keeps this learning journey interesting.
You know what's actually interesting that someone could do if they really wanted to like make a bunch of YouTube content and it would be good? Is if the right person made a video for each spec, kind of talking about when that spec was good and bad throughout the years. I would watch that. Bro, if someone came up with like, not everyone wouldn't watch every class, which is kind of hard YouTube stuff to make. Like my initial YouTube videos were very specifically directed at raid leaders, which are not a lot of people. It's a very small percentage of the WoW community, but they were great for those specific people. They didn't get a lot of views, but they were like really well liked for specific people. This would be exactly like that. Like, dude, if someone made like a Windwalker monk, like this is basically how good or bad this spec was in every single patch and what changed about it, dude, that would be so interesting to me. But only Windwalkers would watch it, so it's not... You're not incentivized to make content like that because it's not going to make you a lot of money.
Fresh by treating it as though it's an RPG experience where you're very much in charge of the pace at which the action happens. To that end, it has achievements, leaderboards, daily goals, and much more. It builds a scenario where you can set the pace and get things done at your own speed. And above all, Boot.dev wants to get you hands-on writing and understanding your own code, as that's such an effective way to learn the content. But even, for example, if you just wanted to try Boot.dev out before committing to something more long-term.
What are we fucking watching right now? Holy shit.
First month or year. We're gonna make a start with the plate wearers today and descend down the order of armor types.
All right, warrior. When was the most broken warrior ever was? We'll start with well, it's kind of hard to delineate fury or arms. We'll start with arms. You guys are gonna say vanilla? Okay. Okay, so interesting note about me is I don't know anything about the game before Cataclysm, so I was going to say for Arms Warrior, Dragon Soul Girthalak. Any rememberers? Any Dragon Soul Girthalak Arms Warriors? That shit fucking owned. Any Arms Warriors Lucid Dreams Execute phase in BFA? That was pretty insane. Okay, what about Fury Warrior? Or was that also vanilla? Was it both? Did you play both Arms and Fury and vanilla? Okay, Fury is vanilla. Vanilla was Fury. Okay, cool. So He's going to mention PvP too, so if anyone wants to make something up about whatever the fuck's going on in PvP, that would be cool. But, all right, Prot Warrior. Also, probably early times in WoW, because, like, wasn't Warrior, like, kind of the only suitable tank for, like, fucking years? Like, I'm trying to think of, like, modern tanking, which is basically the first time that all tanks got active mitigation, which is Mist of Pandaria. Like, before Mist of Pandaria, tanks just, like, got healed. And a lot of them just didn't have active mitigation, like shield block. They just straight up just got hit. They had, like, some cooldowns, but they didn't have, like, what you know as active mitigation now. So, like, pre-active mitigation, Warriors dominated forever. Like for example, tanking blobs on Spine was impossible on anything but a Prot Warrior until you got gear in that patch. You just kind of just had a Prot Warrior forever. It was just part of the game. So I'm going to say it has to be then for Prot. Let's see where we go here.
Warrior. When I think of Warrior's most overpowered state, it wasn't a patch or an update where they were changed. It was an expansion.
Yeah, vanilla.
For me to choose Warrior's most overpowered state ever, I have to go for Fury Warrior throughout literally the whole of vanilla. If you played much vanilla during Classic, Era, and so on, I'm sure more often than not, you've seen a whole lot of Warrior on your DPS meters. And one of the key reasons why is how their resource, rage, scaled as they got better.
Okay, for whatever it's worth, this is, if you were just going off of Warcraft log statistics, now keep in mind, I know nothing about Classic. I know we haven't seen the high outlier on this, but I'll go through and show you. Enhanced Shaman at max percentile looks like this, looks better than this right now. So, saying that this is the most overpowered warrior ever was is... Just looking at just this picture, which may not show the whole thing, I didn't play in Classic, is actually not that impressive. I actually thought it would be a lot more.
To gear. Infamously, Warriors used to start expansions incredibly
That was for
weak,
multiple
and then by
patches
the
and
end
raids,
of
though.
them,
True.
and it was really all down to rage. The reason why is Warrior's rage before Cataclysm was not normalized, meaning the more damage you deal with your auto attacks, the more rage
Max,
you
a big thing with this is Warriors scale way better with world buffs, and it's not just a class thing. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's some Mickey Mouse shit.
generate. And when you get more rage, you can spend more rage, and then you upgrade your gear, and you can get more rage, and you have more rage to spend, and you can kind of see the loop that happens here, where the better your gear gets, the more damage you get, but just on a much more exponential level than any other class. This made Warriors scale better with gear than any other class by an absolute mile. Also, there were some extra tricks here. For example, human and orc racials for weapon skills in vanilla actually ended up giving extra hit chance.
Mickey Mouse
imagine
shit.
when they put these flavoursome things in the game when it was first releasing, they didn't think too much of it. They just thought, orcs, they use axes, humans use swords and maces, let's put that in the game, it sounds fun. But it ended up being extremely impactful. This bonus to 5 weapon skill also affected glancing blows. So against a boss level enemy, each auto attack has a 40% chance to be a glancing blow, which deal 65% of regular damage. But if you were using a +5 skill ratio,
I don't need this much context.
used an appropriate, very big deal. Other melee could benefit from this too as well, but other melee didn't get more resources from having their auto attacks hitting harder, so this was a bigger win for the
interesting.
Warriors.
Okay,
But wait,
that context
there is
actually
more. In
does
Classic, of course,
is
Heroic
interesting.
Strike was a rage spender, not an instant attack as it was in Cataclysm. So if you were spamming Heroic Strike, you couldn't generate rage from your main hand attack because it wasn't going to be an auto attack. However, if you had Heroic Strike queued to be your next main hand attack, your offhand's hit chance would be modified as if it were also a special attack, effectively lowering its hit chance penalty from 27%.
Dude, while he's yapping about all this extra shit, how do you guys feel about green beans on like a tier list of vegetables? I feel like it would be only A tier and not S. Okay, you guys saying F have zero taste, by the way. You actually have zero taste, but it's fine. Have you guys... Actually, I'll say this. Anyone who's saying F has never had green bean casserole. Green bean... How do you spell casserole? Oh, like that, I guess. I'm telling you, this shit you're looking at right here might be one of the best things I've eaten in my entire life. It is so fucking insane. So if you're saying F on green beans, here is my official take, and this is the correct take as well. It's not subjective. This is correct. Green beans would be an A tier vegetable if not for the existence of green bean casserole, which bumps it to an S. It's not arguable. Continuing here.
Which is pretty bad, down to 6%. So if you were hit capped, it was going to hit, and you were going to keep that rage bar full and be able to spam abilities. You add on top of this world buffs and a shopping list of consumables, giving you tons of bonus stats, and of course loads more crits for even more rage, and you end up with a class which, even in pre-raid BIS, could absolutely dominate others in full Naxxramas gear. And if we take a look at the top 1% of passes logged here, you can really
Are we going
to
to talk about other specs of Warrior, though?
This first one shows
maybe he's just going to do classes? Oh, I mean, it is the most broken state of every class, not spec, so maybe he will skip. That's interesting.
Classic, where warriors were easily doing 2 times the damage of most other classes.
Might just skip here.
Here's the top 1% of
he's highlighting mage.
Classic era at the moment. Again, you can see that warriors are just absolutely crushing everyone. If you're playing vanilla and you want to do damage, you have to pick warrior. Vanilla. Next up is paladin. Out of every...
Okay, paladin. And this is every spec of paladin? Okay. Unless, is he only talking about damage? Wrath? What, Wrath, Ret Paladin with Shadowmourne? So, give me an answer here. So, was Ret Paladin with Shadowmourne, was that the best DPS in the game by like 10% or something? Like really, really strong? It's always hard to tell with Ret. Did you guys know Ret is like the most played spec ever? Like it's actually more popular than like every other spec. You can tell that recently, especially in Dragonflight. Like not class. Like if you combined all of the mages versus Ret, I'm talking spec. It's fucking insane. So like people have crazy nostalgia about Ret, and there's just a lot of people. So you're gonna get more Ret answers than Prot or Holy. Ret was top 5 with Shadowmourne. Actually, here's a question. Was there any time in the game when Ret was the best class in the game? Did the most damage of any class? It did in Mythic Plus last expansion when it got reworked very briefly. Wrath pre-patch. Dragonflight with Lego before. Yeah, I mean Rets and Dragonflight. I don't think they were top single target though, but they were the best they were the best Mythic Plus class. I actually just wonder, is it possible that there is a spec in this game that has actually never been the #1 spec in the game? It certainly is. Maybe we'll find that through this video. Okay, so we're not really sure about Ret. Sounds like maybe Wrath, maybe Dragonflight, unironically. Okay, let's talk about Prot then. What about Prot Paladin? So, is there any like Prot Paladin times they shined? Was Prot Paladin ever the best tank from Classic through Wrath? Those are the expansions I'm not super familiar with. TBC, Wrath, best in Wrath of Lich King by a lot. So Prot Paladins kind of scaled the most insane in raid content with Vengeance. They weren't as good as Brewmasters for challenge modes, but Prot Paladins just windmill dunked like everyone when played properly in a raid scenario. This was true in Throne of Thunder. And I think it was a little bit closer because of the cloak in whatever the next raid was. The Siege of Orgrimmar. But Prot Paladin was like actually so fucking goated in MoP. Times recently when Prot was good, there was a couple like years in a row where you just ran a Prot Paladin in every raid as one because of their off healing, which was kind of insane. But that wasn't like super strong. You didn't run like 2 Prot Paladins. Like I'm thinking the time, like something that would, is there ever a time where you ran multiple Prot Paladins? Funny, me and Ben did that on Jaina actually before they nerfed it, which was pretty funny. That's probably the answer. Because as tanks, the answer when your class was the most OP is certainly when it was proper to run 2 of them. Maru. Okay. A bunch of answers there. All right, what about Holy Paladin? So I know Wrath of the Lich King, it was super insane, but I think it should be mentioned that Ashen Hollow Shadowlands, unironically, would be considered amongst like almost anything in the game. It was so broken in such a different way. Also, maybe also Holy Paladin in BFA when Glimmer was first released. That was fucking crazy. I don't know. Anyways, we've thought a bunch. We've talked about Paladin a decent bit. Let's see what he came up with. It seems like, I'm guessing he's talking damage. Most broken state of every class in WoW's history, but the thumbnail had like a damage meter, so I'm assuming it's always going to be damage. So he might only be talking about Ret here, which would be very boring. But if that's the case, let's see.
Patch this class has had, the one where I think they were at their strongest has to be right at the start of Wrath of the Lich King. In expansions before that, for the longest time, Ret had either been kind of average as a DPS or a bit of a...
Like, he didn't even like mention Prot or Holy. I think this might actually only be damage, which kind of stinks, but that's okay. So he said Ret at the very beginning of Wrath.
All that for the has to be right at the start of Wrath of the Lich King. In expansions before that, for the longest time, Ret had either been kind of average as a DPS or a bit of a utility pick, but this was going to change in Wrath of the Lich King. After all, this was an expansion about fighting the endless armies of the Scourge. How could the righteous Vindicator, the Retribution Paladin, not end up being great at demolishing armies of undead? In fact, Wrath of the Lich King launch Retribution was only overshadowed by one...
Max, you should ask Dorky to make one specifically for tanks just so you can do a react to it. You know what's funny? I think I might know more about that than Dorky. Like, if you're talking about the history of WoW, I haven't tanked in years, but I'm still familiar with what's strong and why, because I have to do it because of my job. But I also ended up tanking for, like, from Kata all the way through World First stuff in BFA, which I think is longer than Dorky's been playing WoW. So I'm pretty sure I'd be good at that, but also it'd be fun to make that with other people. I just said that just to slander Dorky, by the way. W. He's a little fucking baby. Stay small, idiot.
Other class, which you can probably guess what that's gonna be, more on that in a moment. But Ret in Wrath Classic, when we replayed it, was very different to what we got in 2010 originally, and it was in, to be honest, a very nerfed state. In fact, throughout Wrath Classic, Blizzard even buffed Ret a few times because it was just falling so far behind what people remembered it being. What made them good early on though was pretty simple. They were extremely easy to play, and they did a lot of damage.
Were Rets literally #1 DPS at the beginning of Wrath? Not top 5? Like, #1? No? Then why... How is this not the Dragonflight version when they came out post rework? They were #1. How is this the strongest Red has been?
You walked up to
that doesn't
an
even make
enemy
sense.
and you applied Crusader Strike Judgment and Divine Storm to their face, and it would kind of just delete their health bar. And Paladins
He's a classic content creator. I mean, I could understand, but it says in WoW's history. That would be crazy if it meant in WoW's history, but only meaning the first 3 expansions.
Of course, had their great toolkit of utility through blessings and various hands as well. Even though your average human male Ret Pala had somewhere between a 5 to 10% chance to have actually keybound anything other than their damage abilities. And Ret did very well in PvE and PvP as well. Launch Wrath for the Lich King Ret Pallies were just in a fantastic state, and for me, it has to be one of the most powerful states they've ever been in. Of course, in major patches in Wrath the Lich King, Ret was
we don't even know if that's
again and again,
we don't even know if that's the case yet. We'll wait.
But then they became a bit more powerful at the end of the expansion with their 2-piece tier 10, which gave Divine Storm a chance to reset off all.
Max, basically it was more broken at that time than Dragonflight Ret, but it was only second at that X-Pack. That can be true, but probably often isn't true. Like, it can be true that your class is actually more broken than when it was the best class in the game, but the way that everyone views everything in this game is relative to everyone else. Like, your damage number doesn't mean anything until it has the context of where that damage is in relation to other things. So it'd be super hard to make that argument.
To attacks, as well as of course getting
And someone just said blow up. All right, fuck it. I'll blow up then.
All in all, though, for Paladin, launch Wrath of the Lich King Retribution has to be my choice. Which means next we have the Death Knight, and this is the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, this is just going to be like all of Wrath, right? DK was just absurdly broken. But just for fun, let's talk about non-Wrath DK. So, Unholy DK in Throne of Thunder was insane. Unholy DK, pretty much all of... like, since PI existed, was fucking insane. Frost DK had a couple of tiers where it was super crazy. Frost DK now? You know what? Frost DK right now is, outside of Ancient WoW, is maybe as good as it's ever been. But the thing is it's so specific to cleave, but that's such an important part of the game now. Like, the game used to be dominated by single target exclusively, all of the classic stuff. Right? I mean, the answer is Wrath stuff. Okay, what about Blood DK? So Blood DK has many options. So most recently, it was Sepulcher, Dancing Rune Weapon tier set for Blood DK. You have End of Legion, Consumption for Leech for your group. I think it was maybe the End of Legion because you were the only tank that was fully self-sufficient at the End of Legion, and that made it seem so much more... like, if you were another tank, you needed healing, and Blood DKs needed none. And that is the biggest gap of all time, right? Like, you literally zero healed stuff. So, like, that was fucking crazy. Honestly, Blood DK has kind of been insanely broken, like, throughout a lot of WoW's history. But broken and by far the most fun tank are maybe often confused, too. But, I think in Kata Classic right now, Blood DKs are out DPSing mages with the Blood DK wearing cloth gear. What? Is that true? That's fucking insane. I mean, you could just say the same thing about Mop, though, right? Like, pick any tank and just say they're out DPSing all the DPS. That would have been accurate, so... All right. Let's hear what he has to say.
One on the list by far. I don't even think it's up for debate which the most powerful version of DK ever was. Because again, much like Paladin, it was their state they were at when Wrath of the Lich King first launched, and it's just not even...
Just an honorable mention, though. DK DPS with PI. And when that came out. And also AoE DK in Season 2 of BFA. With Reaping. I mean, that was insane. It's just worth bringing up.
In fact, Death Knights on Wrath's launch were the most...
You literally did more single target with Festermite stacks, like AoEing, than like twice as much as any class could do on a boss. It's fucking insane.
Will ever be in this game's history. I don't think anything will top this. When Blizzard said back then they were putting a hero class in the game, oh boy, they meant it. So let me try and break down for you what made them so overpowered. Initially, Death Knights weren't designed with any spec being made for a specific role. If you wanted to DPS,
which is crazy.
Blood, yeah,
that's insane. That's insane. Like, think about that now. Hey guys, we came up with this new class, but all the specs, they're kind of fluid. We don't really know if they're tanks or DPS. Like, I feel like the only way that could possibly turn out is they are going to be unkillable DPS. That even if they don't do insane damage, they're just going to be unkillable, which makes them better than everyone. Or they're going to be tanks that do more damage than every tank. Like, it would be... You could not do that. It's just, you know...
To tankers Unholy, no problem. Do you want to be a hybrid Frost Unholy Blood DPS tank? I mean, yeah, sure, go for it. Why not?
So right now, DPS DKs are unkillable?
Ludicrously overtuned. Yeah. You could do anything you wanted to, and it would work. And this went for both PvE and PvP as well. In Season 1 of Wrath's PvP, DKs in barely any gear could
PvP
smash their way to high ratings. And in PvE, any spec combo worked for doing anything. anything. I'll tell you a
This
few
isn't
more
making
things
my
about
eyes hurt at all.
DK. I'll
That's
launch Chains of
good
Ice
camera
was
work right there.
initially a root before being a decaying slow afterwards. Icebound Fortitude was a 50% damage reduction, which of course made you immune to stuns with a 2-minute cooldown. And you're a DK, so you can become immune to magic through anti-magic shell, which was more powerful back then, and you could immune fears too through the talent.
Was it more powerful back then? Surrounds the Death Knight and anti-magic shell, absorbing 75% of the damage dealt by harm for spells. Damage absorbed by anti-magic shell, energize the Death Knight with additional runic power. And it lasts 3 seconds. What was the cooldown of it? Was it 15 seconds? Because if it was 45 seconds, it's, I would say, arguably as powerful now. But if it was 15 seconds, that's fucking crazy.
Lichborn. DK's class design when it came to their self-healing was just a few expansions ahead of every other class, and a Bloodspec DK could just live endlessly whilst doing great damage. The first version of Plague Strike used to remove heal over time effects. There was a glyph of Death and Decay that gave it a 20% chance to fear you.
Just imagine you're doing your rotation and you're just hitting buttons and your opponent is just losing their heals.
Place for 2 seconds, and it could chain proc off of itself. And when finally you got enough people together to kill a DK, they could resurrect themselves with the Shadow of Death talent and keep on fighting as a ghoul for 45 seconds. And this worked in Arena too, by the way. The entire class was just the best at everything they could do, and the legacy of Wrath of the Lich Kings launched Death Knights and...
Dude, if you guys were like turned into some abomination, either in like whatever fictional depiction of hell has ever existed, or just whatever, like you see this ghoul just running around, what like abomination would you guys be? Would you be a big A-bomb? Would you be a little ghoul? Maybe a little ghost? I'd be a ghost, dude. Can you imagine how crazy you'd be to just like fucking spook people out? Just be like, boo! Do that kind of shit? I do that. I just like scare people. I mean, you'd scare people with this thing too, just not in the same way.
In Arena too.
You'd be a gargoyle? Oh, gargoyles go hard. That's a good answer. But then you'd be so stationary. You know?
By the way,
I'm trying to be just fucking ghosting around and shit.
The class was just the best at
there's a wall right there. Just kidding. I'm a ghost. Right through that shit.
The Lich Kings launched Death Knights and how powerful they were was not an exaggeration. Over time throughout Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard would have to nerf this class again and again and
You'd be an ooze? Oh my god, dude. Being an ooze goes crazy. Just imagine being like a singular cell organism just fucking flopping around.
Certain specs rose to prominence for different roles.
That's me.
Blood became the tank. Frost was a dual wielder DPS, and Unholy was a two-handed DPS. Death Knight still had some of that flexibility they had from launch. For example, in Wrath Classic, it turned out that Unholy actually dual-wielded the whole way through the expansion till they got Shadowmourne, I believe. But at the end of the day, they were a shadow compared to how they were when Wrath first dropped. And by Cataclysm, Blizzard ended up cementing these roles in place for the Death Knight for the future. Either way, those first few weeks of Wrath of the Lich King on the DK were completely out of hand in the most brilliant way possible. And for me, the Death Knight's best state ever is easily the launch of Wrath of the Lich King.
Cool.
On to the mail wearers. So let's start with Hunter.
Hunter. Most broken Hunter ever was. So Survival Hunter and like Dragon Soul was pretty insane. So maybe like all of Cata Classic, although I'm not sure if I saw a ton of them in that thing. Survival in BFA Season 4. True. However, that was only Mythic Plus. That wasn't really true in almost all the raid fights. And this guy seems to be a little biased towards earlier stuff in WoW, so I'm thinking he's not going to do that. Although, that doesn't really matter. We can just ignore that. Hunters, maybe Blackrock Foundry. So Blackrock Foundry, they were top damage, and Aspect of the Fox existed, which was a cooldown that made everyone be able to cast while moving, and it was essential into doing the hardest boss ever. You ran like 4 hunters on the last boss. So that's really strong. I think BM with Stampede had some times in Mop that was really fucking good. I also think MM was really, really strong in Hellfire Citadel. But I have no knowledge of like classic through Wrath of the Lich King Hunter. I know nothing about that. If they were like super sick in any of those. All right, let's see.
For Hunter, I'm going to pick something which is probably a little bit unexpected. In fact, it's from a very recent version of World of Warcraft in the grand scheme of things, but it's one where Hunters have consistently been broken for...
What could he be talking about? He said relatively recent in the grand scheme of things, which makes me think...
about as long as this seasonal server has existed. For Hunters, I'm picking the state they were in during early phase 1 of Season of Discovery. So as we all know, Season of Discovery, it's classic WoW's second seasonal server, where Blizzard have
what are we fucking doing here? What are we fucking doing here? What is this Mickey Mouse ass fucking video?
New abilities, kind of like how enchants work, but you can swap them out whenever. Now the thing that was completely broken for Hunters wasn't actually the Hunter themselves.
Who cares?
It was their pet. So typically pets in vanilla are, well, they're good until they're not. When you're leveling, they do tons of damage.
How good were they though?
Generate loads of threats.
We'll just skip this. Just like, were they fucking crazy though? Like insane, like double. They were insane.
Hunter, but then you get to endgame and
their pets could solo a team
scale with the Hunter's own stats, meaning they fall off a cliff damage wise and survivability wise. On top of that, they have no reduced damage from AoE effects, so when you're on a boss that does AoE stuff, they just die to absolutely anything. And it's just kind of frustrating because, to be honest, you're lucky if your healers even have their pet frames on their bars, and you have to worry about stuff like pet food, training, happiness, you know, all of that good stuff. So along comes Season of Discovery to make changes to the original vanilla format. First up, Hunter pets would now scale with improvements to the Hunter's own gear. Also, there were two...
I'm just skipping Hunter. This is insane. All right, who's next? I can't believe we're talking about Season of Discovery right now.
Any actual tank, because they could generate tons of threat with Growl, and they were just doing more damage than everyone else was as well. Blizzard would end up nerfing Wind Serpents by just straight up not letting Lightning Breath work with Kill Command, and Season of Discovery is an experimental server, and Hunters must have been nerfed over 20 times easily by now. They're still one of the best classes in the game, by the way, but for me the start of Season of Discovery has to have been the most powerful state that Hunters have ever been in. On to Shaman, and the moment in time I picked for
Shaman. Oh boy. Okay, so let's start with easy ones. Ellie. Ellie was really good in Kata. I actually think Ellie might be... Well, yeah, he said he's not going to count like things that were bugs or whatever, so I think Ellie being insanely strong for 1 week and then nerfed is probably not going to qualify. Guys, he just picked fucking Season of Discovery for Hunter, so let's put this all in perspective. I'm thinking, dude, Ellie really hasn't had a time where it's been like the best class in the game. There's been a lot of times in WoW where it's been really good, but I don't know if it's ever actually been number one. Unless it happened like really, really, really early like classic stuff, which I doubt because I would have like heard about that, I think. Desire lore? It just wasn't though. Like, certainly hasn't been since I've started doing Race World First stuff. Or even top 10 world stuff, which has been in the last like 10, 12 years. So it'd have to be like Kata through Classic. Unat Ellie, bro, you're talking about a raid that almost no one did, and it was for a specific boss. It wasn't even like overall single target or Mythic Plus or anything. It was that just doesn't count, yeah. Okay, for Enhance, it might actually be right now. And it's been like, actually like Enhance, honestly, for like a while has been insane, but this is probably the best they've ever been for an extended period of time. They're fucking insane. Enhanced right now, bro. I've never seen Enhanced just better than every single class. It's in everything too. AoE, single target. They're just goats. Okay, what about Resto Shaman? There was like, I don't know if there's any tier in particular, but Resto Shaman, it's not going to be talked about in this video, which is why we're doing it here. The Resto Shaman was run as like a 1 or a 2 of for like so many years. Right now? Huh? We didn't even run one on the raid. That's crazy. No fucking shot. In Mythic Plus, they weren't even that... The only reason they were brought was because Mythic Plus changed and made use of all the stops. Resto Shamans are exactly the same as they were at the end of last expansion. It's just Mythic Plus changed to want all the stuff that they have. Right? Like saying Resto Shaman right now is... They're not even in like the top keys right now. Like that's crazy. So yeah, I don't know. Dude, Resto Shaman in like honestly, like BFA, like Legion and BFA through, man, even like Shadowlands. I feel like you just ran like the beginning of Shadowlands. You just ran a Resto Shaman or 2 of them for like that entire time, like 6 years. Maybe even WoD too. But I don't remember a time where they were just gapping other healers. They were just like a healer you brought. And it wasn't until recent expansions, until Mythic Plus came into it, and they haven't had a extended time as the best Mythic Plus healer outside of like a season or 2, but it's not dominant enough to like mention there. All right, anyways, we have to pick what he thinks. So if the answer to Enhancement Shaman, and we are talking about damage here, is right now, I think we've all learned from this video so far, there is a 0% chance he's going to say right now. So we have to think a little bit earlier. Season of Discovery, that would be insane. That's just the most Mickey Mouse shit ever. Mop? Enhance and Mop? Alright, let's hear it.
The Shaman is the state of enhancement during Throne of Thunder and beyond in Mr. Pandaria. Despite Mr. Pandaria changing talent trees so much, they put a lot of things you'd have otherwise found on those trees straight into your...
He's saying Ellie? Wait, back up.
To Shaman, and the moment in time I picked for the Shaman is the state of enhancement.
Oh, it's enhanced, okay.
During Throne of Thunder and beyond in Mr. Pandaria.
I mean, it was really strong.
Mr. Pandaria changing talent trees so much.
The problem is there was like 2 or 3 specs that were better than Enhance in Throne. And one of them was Warlock, and it was not even close. So I don't know how you could compare that to right now, but I doubt he knows what's happening right now.
Put a lot of things you'd have otherwise found on those trees straight into your spellbook when you picked a spec, and more often than not, it worked out really well. Elemental was definitely in a strong spot during the same time period too, but I'm really just trying to stick to one thing here where possible. During Mr. Pandaria, enhancement
It's also a 2-month-old video or so? Oh, I didn't know that.
Things going for them. Elemental Blast was a new talent that could be made instant via Maelstrom stacks. This would hit really hard, as well as increasing the Shaman's own secondary stats. You had Stormlash Totem that was a thing, which is a minor DPS cooldown for the Shaman. Stormstrike, Lava Lash, and even Feral Spirit just did a good...
I like how he's talking about all of this while I think just purely showing Elemental Shaman gameplay. Am I wrong about that? Isn't this guy just playing Ellie?
Of damage in their own right compared to other versions of WoW, and of course Shaman gained a brand new cooldown in Mr. Pandaria, Ascendance. In MoP, Ascendance would transform your character's model and would also grant auto attacks and Storm Strike a 30-yard range. And there was just something about being able to hit stuff with blasts of wind from miles away.
Also, it's 4th in the meters.
Really satisfying and fun
some
to
Disney
use.
Shit.
During this time, Enhancement was able to put out some serious burst and respectable overall damage in PvE and PvP as well. A lot of these features introduced in Mr. Pandaria have carried forwards into future expansions too, as they just fit the class archetype so well. So all in all, that's why Enhancement during Mr. Pandaria is my choice. Next we have Evoker, World of Warcraft.
So if we're including healers, the answer to this question is not even fucking close. It is this raid. But we're not talking about healers. And if we're talking about support, it's probably AUG when they were initially released. And this is easy because Dev just came out. If we're talking about Dev Evoker, it would be really close between Aberrus and actually this raid. Dev was probably the MVP of our raid this tier. Like, I think Dev was probably the best DPS class for us in the race world first. But Aug is close right now, and Aug was like so much better when it first. So the answer is Aug on release, and it's Dev in either Aberrus or this tier. Although I think this tier would only be like a very high level opinion. I don't think that would be true among like most people. And I'm really interested to hear what this guy says here, actually, just in general.
Fourth, a brand new class on the recent Dragonflight expansion. Now, initially, this class launched with two specializations.
Yep, it's going to be Aug, just from the way he's starting this, right?
Devastation for DPS and Preservation for healing. But in patch 10.15, Blizzard dropped a third spec, Augmentation. This specialization would be unique in World of Warcraft, as it wasn't just directly
this is just the right answer,
or a
right?
tank or a DPS.
They've been meta in Mythic Plus since the second they've come out. And they are required 2 of in raid, and they were the #1 damage in your raid until this expansion. So I guess that's just a Murdersill, to be fair. I mean, that's just the definition of broken, right?
A utility
super broken.
Which,
not to mention they brought defensive
augmented
capabilities.
Their allies' capabilities. Many other games and MMOs over the years have had
Oh, actually, did anyone know exactly when this video came out, by the way?
this utility class fantasy, and usually it's a bard that does this. It's the guy who's chilling at the back of the group, dancing about, playing a lute or
2 months
something.
ago? Oh,
He's
thanks,
like your
okay.
hype-up guy, making your allies do what they do that bit better. Well, in World of Warcraft, we have some dragon-looking thing that sets you on fire and throws sand at you or something. I mean, hey, if it works, right? Anyways, this brand new edition was quickly adopted into both PvE and PvP, but where it really excelled was Mythic Plus.
Yep.
In this smaller scale environment, augmentation felt like it was an absolute necessity, both in terms of survivability.
I think it's arguable whether Aug was more broken in Raid versus Mythic Plus, because a lot of the things that made them broken in Dungeons was like Zephyr and like the group survivability, which had more impact in Dungeons, but that was also true of like all Evokers. I guess not the Obsidian Scales thing, the extra max HP, the Black Dragonflight thing, whatever it's called. But in Raids, like, they were like 20% higher. Okay, Mythic Plus, you're only buffing 2 damage dealers, but you are buffing a tank and a healer, which does have value. Crazy value. But in Raid, you were buffing 4 damage dealers, and your Augs in Raid, when they first came out in Murdersill, were doing like 20% more DPS than the best DPS in the game. 20, do you guys know how big of a bar 20% is? That is a fucking huge number. And that would be maybe among the most broken any class has ever been, purely damage-wise. So he's mentioning in Mythic Plus, but I just want to say in Raid, like, a Murdersill Aug was absurdly broken, played correctly. Like, maybe more broken than any DPS has ever been over a entire Raid tier. Like, 20% is insane. Like, when he showed Fury Warrior from Classic earlier, that was not 20%, right? Like, that 20% is a massive number. Yeah, I think he's going to go with Mythic Plus, though. I think that's probably true because, like, you can't put a number value on it, but the survivability it gave tanks and the extra healing it gave healers, the power relative to the mode. I mean, initial Aug, you're pushing, like, 2 key levels higher than without Aug. Or something like that. Maybe it was 1.
And boosting your allies'
that's like
damage.
a crazy number.
And everyone wanted an Aug Invoker for their Mythic Plus group as well. Not only were they overtuned at launch, they just made you do so much more damage. And as we all know, more damage.
And anyone could play it. That is not fucking true. Yo, I actually did Mythic Plus in that season, and you saw, and to be fair, it was a new spec, so a little bit more expected, but I saw some absolutely subhuman behavior. Like, Evoker's only bit is buffing your damage, and they would just see the other 2 DPS use their 2 minutes, not use Breath of Eons, and then use it when no one's doing any damage. The things they would die to are completely absurd. Like, Like because they were so good, so many people played them, and it was so new that you saw some people in key levels they weren't supposed to be in, and some shit you'd never forget for the rest of your life. It was tough.
Season 2 of Dragonflight would see access to a God Comp 4 Mythic Plus of Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Fire Mage, Shadow Priest, and an Augmentation Invoker, which totally dominated the patch, with people timing keys in the early 30s, and if we were to check Dragonflight Season 1 as a comparison, you can see how much more class variety there was. Also, the higher your key got, the value of Augmentation's ability to just make the party live through their shields, their CC, and just giving everyone a ton more versatility got more and more noticeable. In following patches, Blizzard would aim to tone down this new spec and really a new role to World of Warcraft, but they remain a controversial pick. When augmentation is good, they're mandatory, and when they're bad, you just take another DPS. To this day, people argue whether augmentation was an innovation and that the support role should be embraced by more classes, or whether it was a mistake and it should be reworked into a more traditional healer. Either way.
Yep, it is. I still think that's like ultra controversial. If you talk about this in Twitch chats, especially like the hyper localized Twitch chat of like a high end WoW player or Mythic Plus player, it's still like AUG was a mistake. AUG should have never existed. But I bet in the grand scheme of things, man, it's still. I mean, I would bet it's like close to 50-50. The high end community hates AUG for sure. But I would imagine there's a lot of players who love it. Regardless, they're not going to rework or remove augmentation, but something I do think would be interesting is if they're ever going to create more support specs. I used to hear that as a solution to AUG. They're like, there's nothing wrong with AUG. The only problem is there aren't enough support, and it's the only one. And I've always thought that was a super interesting take, because I thought it's more like, are you for or against support classes in general? There being more of them, if you don't like AUG being a support, you wanting more support is a crazy, crazy solution to that problem. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Yeah, I remember for a while people were like, oh yeah, Disc is just going to be made into a support. There were probably people just like screaming. Okay, yeah.
When augmentation was added into the game, things changed, and we're still feeling those effects now. Next, let's move on to the leather wearers, and we'll begin
with Druid. Okay, so we'll talk about all four roles, but he's going to mention DPS. So let's do DPS first. So Feral Druid is okay. So specifically on a single raid boss in Kata, being a Neltharion. That's like a single boss thing. That was probably the most broken Druid DPS ever was. But I don't think that's fair, because it's not even like... It's like a very niche fight mechanic thing. They were also really good in Wrath, but I don't think that they were like the best class in the game. So like Feral Druids in Siege of Orgrimmar were #1 DPS by a lot. So I'd say it's probably Siege, and that was true in Cleave and Single Target. I think that's when they were the best. That's when I was in my heyday. So I'm a little nostalgic for that, though. So maybe it's not that, but it's definitely... I mean, Siege is better than anything that's happened in the past 12 years since Siege was out. 11 years. But I don't know about Wrath specifically, but unless it was beating every class in the game by 10%, the answer is not Wrath. And then you talk about Moonkin. So completely unfamiliar with Moonkin from Kata and before that. The answer is probably Venthyr Moonkin. That shit was insane. But also, like, I don't know, it's been good. Other tiers too. Like, I was gonna say Sylvanas, but that was also Venthyr. Convoke was crazy in PvP. Oh yeah, he said he was gonna mention PvP. Are you talking progression or? Because Aflock, Dumpsters, Feral, and Siege? I think the #1 DPS on a single target boss in that tier had Feral ahead of every class in the game by like 30k. And that was back when 30 or 40k, and that was back when numbers were below 1 million. So yeah, it was a lot. But it was also really high rolly. Any other time for Moonkin besides Venthyr? Was Moonkin good in Classic at all? Okay, I don't even know. It's probably Venthyr. Okay, so Guardian Druid. I think the best Guardian Druid ever was, not including Ancient WoW. I'm not familiar with Guardian Druid from like Wrath and before that. But for recent expansions, it was definitely WoD. It was Hellfire Citadel. Guardian Druids were significantly more damage and more tanky than every single tank in Hellfire Citadel. They were also really, really tanky in Nighthold and Tomb of Sargeras. But they did not do as much damage. So I played Source. I played top 5 World Guardian for all of those things I just mentioned. And Guardian was absolutely relatively stronger in HFC than it was in all of Legion. And then Guardian also, I mean, you could also say Guardian in the 0.5 patch when AUG came out last expansion. But that's only Mythic Plus. You never saw a raid tier where they were like super strong, like really, really OP. So I think it's going to be hard for him to consider something like that, although he's not going to talk about Guardian anyway. I would say like strongly it was HFC Guardian. Your stream's dying, by the way, Max. Oh yeah, I am dropping a lot of frames right now. Huh. Well, stay small. Okay. Let's see what they say.
With the Druid. And for Druid, I'm going to go the state that they were in, specifically in PvP during Season 1 of Shadowlands. So one of the biggest and most controversial features of Shadowlands were Covenants. These new factions would grant you abilities upon siding with one of them, which at least early on into the expansion you couldn't change in any easy way, so you better have picked the right one. Upon siding with the Night Fae Druids, amongst other things, will be granted access to a new spell, Convoke the Spirits. This ability would fire off 16 random Druid spells over a 4-second duration. That's one spell per quarter of a second on a channeled cast. These random spells would be tailored to your specialization.
That's tough.
But could include your hardest hitting abilities, which typically had cooldowns or you needed resources to use them. So when you press this button and the game decided to use your best abilities and have them crit, you could just absolutely erase people from the face of the game. And early on in Shadowlands PvP, a Druid could pop out of stealth and press Convoke.
This fucking clip. This is so stupid.
And early on in Shadowlands PvP,
he didn't even have little HP. That person is just as geared as this Druid, the same max HP.
a Druid could pop out of stealth and press Convoke.
And it almost killed the other guy. It did kill the other guy.
Before they had the chance to do anything about it. This had to have been one of the easiest one-button one-shots we've seen in a long time in
I do
PvP.
check YouTube chat, stop saying that.
And it makes me think back to the good old days of Pom Pyro Mages. But whether it was open world, arenas, or battlegrounds, a Druid just appearing out of stealth and doing enough damage to kill your character 2 times.
I mean, that's a pretty good point. I mean, when he started talking about some PvP shit, that's pretty brutal, but
over in 4 seconds was an absolute terror to behold. And that's why for Druid I've got to pick Shadowlands Season 1 Convoke the Spirits. Next up I have Demon Hunter.
Okay, so Demon Hunter DPS. Well, let's do tank, because tank's easy. The answer to tank is the entire of last expansion for Vengeance, right? They've never been a really popular / used raid tank. But I actually think Mythic Plus is usually a better way of determining a tank's overall power level because you're stressing what a tank is capable of much more sufficiently. Like in Raid, they create an experience for everyone. In Race World First, it's very hard to do it. But like after that, you get geared and it's easy and it never scales in difficulty. But Mythic Plus literally scales in difficulty. So you are able to like push tanking to what is possible. Even though you're usually capped by what your group can survive. sometimes you can get pretty close to like what's possible to tank. I want to say tanking for Vengeance would definitely be the end of last expansion. All right, so now for Havoc. So Legion, Havoc, Demon Hunter with Bloodlet and Momentum was really, really good. Beginning of Legion. But I don't... man, I'm struggling to remember. I don't think they were, like, topping. They were really good, and everyone was playing one. And it was really fun. But I actually don't think that it was better than Demon Hunter in, like, Season 3. I think Demon Hunter in Season 3 of last expansion might be the best they've been. Oh, yeah, the infinite I-beam thing. I remember that shit. That was crazy. Yeah. I think I'm okay with I'm okay with Season 3 Shadowlands and Intro to Legion, but I think this guy's absolutely going to say the beginning of Legion. Now that is Cope from you. Love playing it in Season 3. It was good for sure, but not the best ever. I'm not Cope. I don't really care. But they were like top tier on every raid boss, and they were top tier in Mythic Plus in Season 3. I did what I do now in Legion, and I don't remember Demon Hunters being something you brought like back when there weren't any raid buffs. You brought 3 or 4 of because they were super insane like you did other classes. Like you just didn't do that with Demon Hunters. You ran like 1 or maybe 2. That hasn't changed in a while, but like you ran 2 for sure in that season. They were super OP. I don't know if... All I'm saying is there's no Cope for me. I don't care. I have no emotion tied to it whatsoever. I don't care about being right about it. I'm just saying that like you wanted to bring more of them then than you did then. Like they weren't something you brought a million of because you thought they were sick. That wasn't true then. That I don't think they were... There were some bosses they were topping on, but...
And once again, we're going to go more on the PvP side of things.
I'm going to blow up.
And I'm going to be picking the state they were in during PvP throughout Dragonflight. What made them so good at this point in time?
This, while it's a meme that PvP is in this video whatsoever, if you're going to include PvP, that was true. Like they were like... I only hear from the PvP community when something's really wrong and they're complaining about things, and bro, they complain about Demon Hunter the whole time.
Was to get the basics down and put out a lot of damage, Demon Hunter was really simple to pilot, and at a basic level it always has been, to be fair, with most of their damage coming from abilities such as Blade Dance or I-Beam. So even if you're a bit more of a beginner to the PvP scene, you could get great results. A lot of PvP games over the years have had that one character that's really good when you're first getting into the game, but in Dragonflight, Demon Hunter
I'm just gonna skip this
as well.
Skipping this.
For me, and
cool.
It seems for the leatherware is so far. PvP content is dominating here.
Okay, they're gonna pick PvP, but just for fun. Who's at my door? Second. Are they just leaving something, or are they staying? Oh, they left. Okay. Why ring the doorbell then? Why do that? All good. Okay. So he's going to talk about PvP. That sucks. So we'll probably skip this whole thing. But let's talk about when Rogue was really, really strong. Rogue in... So combat Rogue through like all of Wrath and WoD was insane. Outlaw Rogue and Mythic Plus during like BFA was super fucking insane. Sub Rogue specifically on Zool was insane. Warlords of Draenor, Soul Capacitor Rogue Burst was kind of fucking insane. Rogues have honestly been like fucking crazy. You used to run like 3 or 4 rogues in like every raid and mop because of Smoke Bomb, but that's like a different level of being powerful. He's kind of like only referencing damage. And those were 25 mans, so you just brought more people in general. Rogues, and then I'm sure rogues were like probably sick in like the beginning of WoW or something. I don't know. But he's talking about PvP. Is there any time recently when rogues have been like super good, like best class? Oh wait, like when they were reworked, right? Wasn't there a rework patch when rogues, like all 3 specs of rogues were the top in raid? Was it a Myrdrasil? There was definitely a Warcraft logs chart where the top 3 were the 3 rogue specs, and it was for a while too. I'm pretty sure it was that. That has to be the answer, right? Because I don't think that's happened for any spec in the history of WoW, where all 3 of your DPS specs or multiple are both the, or all 3 the very best thing. That has to be the strongest they've ever been, and it was like that for months. It was nerfed though, but okay, he's going to talk about some PvP shit. Let's just hear it.
Now, rogues are a class fantasy where a key part of it is, well, to not be fair in the first place. They play dirty, and they don't adhere to any honourable rules. And this is especially true for player versus player combat. My pick for rogue is going to be their state in vanilla.
Oh yeah,
for
Tumas
PvP.
Sargeras too, yeah.
This is where the rogue's toolkit
that was less about their damage and more about a defensive thing, and he's mostly referring to damage.
Really shine, and they were able to pull off some incredible combos. The thing is about rogues back then is, whilst in a great player's hands,
let's just skip this shit. Some PvP nonsense.
PvP. It was a game that had a tip. Next I have Monk, and I have to be honest here, Monk is the class which I think it was the most difficult to find a properly overpowered state.
Okay, so because he's mostly talking about damage, I can tell you from Monk's perspective when I believe each spec was the most powerful. So for Windwalker, Windwalker and Antorus was about 8 to 10% more single target than every spec in the game, and they were the best Mythic Plus class. So they think the answer has to be Antorus, at least with recent Monk. The only thing I think is close is Mist of Pandaria, Throne of Thunder. Before they changed their mastery, they ran Rune of Reorigination just like Ferals did to snapshot their mastery, which used to buff their Tiger Eye Brew. And similar to how Ferals like got Rune of Reorigination, put their dots up, and got their stats back, Monks procced Rune of Reorigination. When it was about to end, they pressed Tiger Eye Brew. It buffed their damage by 400%. And then they got all their stats back. That was absolutely insane. They were like competing with Warlocks in that raid, but almost no one played them. If you guys have ever looked at playing charts, like almost no one plays Windwalker. That's changed a bit in the last 4 years since they've been meta, 6 years since they've been like really good at Mythic Plus a lot. But like back in MoP, Windwalker was like not played. Like no one fucking played Windwalker in their guilds. A lot of people Brewmaster and a lot of people Mistweaver because Mistweaver was super broken. The answer to when the most broken Brewmaster was arguably MoP for challenge modes. They were way better than the next best tank, and that was an important part of the game. Wasn't Mythic Plus then, so it's like kind of was the game's Mythic Plus then, not really. If you're talking raid, I think either Blackrock Foundry or Eternal Palace is when they were the strongest compared to other tanks, both in terms of damage and being unkillable. Blackrock Foundry, I'm pretty sure the answer is Blackrock Foundry because they were, and I was tanking full time back then. That was when we started Limit. I had every tank. I tanked on every tank all the time. Monks were completely absurd in Blackrock Foundry. And Mistweaver's really easy. It's when they came out. Jab, uplift. Mistweaver did, I think, like 40 to 50% more healing than the next healer or something. It was like as broken as Preservation was this raid, but it just like normal, you know? Okay, anyways, what's he going to say? If it's PvP, I'm turning the video off.
Even during their release expansion in Mists of Pandaria, they tended to be pretty fair across all of their specs.
One of the most broken they've ever been was during Mists of Pandaria, but go off.
But for Monk, I think one of their best spots has to have been for Brewmasters during...
He's gonna do a tank thing. I actually respect that.
BFA. It's a bit of a lesser remembered expansion for sure, but arguably...
I mean, that was one of the times we said Eternal Palace, Brewmaster specifically, but not all of BFA. They weren't the best tank in Uldir. They weren't the best tank... They weren't the best tank in Uldir. They weren't the best tank in Battle for Dazar'alor, and they weren't the best tank or even used in the Race to World First in Nyalotha. So it was only Eternal Palace, just like I stated before that. And they were also not BIS and Mythic Plus for almost the entirety of the expansion. Oh, it was the beginning. I think they were really good in Season 1. But I don't know. Everyone ran Monks for Uldir, but they weren't good in Uldir. So people were just playing Monks because Monks were good at the end of the previous expansion. And like people were just like, that was back when people were just like, yep, stagger's insane. But like they just didn't understand stagger and how much extra healing it made you require if you did it improperly. Like basically they just thought if your tank had stagger, they would just die less. But that's just not how that actually happened. It's just like a facade. What's his argument? It's just not for all of BFA. It's just not true.
It was when Brewmaster monks found their best representation as a tank, at least in raiding throughout all versions.
That's just nonsense. Like they were played, both us and Method played double Brewmaster monk in Uldir, and both of us were wrong. That was the wrong tank. That was not the best tank in that patch at all. We played maybe one of them in Battle of Dazar'alor, which was also not needed, or you could argue was not the best tank. They were both really good in Eternal Palace. That was true, but it was specifically Eternal Palace, and they were really fucking good. But then they were bad in Ny'alotha. This is not true.
World of Warcraft that they've existed in. During Battle for Azeroth, Monk's key damage mitigation tool Stagger underwent a bit of a rework. So Stagger had been a key part of Brewmaster's kit for a long time, and would cause some of their damage to be taken instantly and some of it over time, affecting both physical and magical damage. Managing your Stagger was key to playing a Monk well, as taking too much damage and having your Stagger stack up too much would really start to stress your healers out, so you needed to manage your cooldowns, especially Purifying Brew, really well, and this brew would cancel out 40% of your active stagger. At least it was that much in BFA. The big deal in this expansion was that your stagger was—
Bro, you're telling me you're going to pick a non-DPS for the first time, which probably isn't even accurate because as opposed to a lot of other classes you've brought up, Windwalker monks were actually 8 to 10% ahead of every class at everything in Antorus. For like 6 to 8 months. They were the best class in the game at everything in PvE, which is not true of a lot of the things he's brought up. It was like very good or among the top. It wasn't the best. And it was at all content. They were also insane in PvP. So you don't pick a DPS for the first time ever. All right, cool. All right, so you're going to be like, okay, let's choose a tank or a healer. And you're going to choose Brewmaster over fucking Mistweaver when they came out, which is also closer to Classic, which is what this person specializes in. Mist of Pandaria Classic is coming out in not too long. Mistweaver, at the beginning of that expansion, was completely insane. Was probably the best healer spec ever. Insane. And then you choose Brewmaster, and then it's not even right.
Changed to be based off of a percentage of your agility
I'm gonna blow
instead of a flat amount. So as your gear improved, your mitigation improved. At the start
I'm
of
sideways.
BFA, it was based
I'm
off
tilted.
140%
I'm on the
of
moon
your
right now.
agility, and then by 8.1 it had already been nerfed down to 105%, and then all the way down to 90% by patch 8.3.
Oh, stagger.
But
This is so wrong.
the time too much.
Going forward.
And Brewmaster really was able to do that during. Finally, we have the cloth wearers. We'll begin with the priest, and I'm going to be picking
It's not even close. It's Shadow Priest, Surrender to Madness, and Legion.
Shadow at the start of Legion. So Legion saw huge class changes
not even close.
for many different classes.
We don't need the whole
Demonology
explanation. We were all there.
One of the most equally fun, broken, and
Alright,
to
next.
Madness. Press the button. 200 Emerald Nightmare, the shortest race to world first ever for a mythic
This
raid.
also, Shadow Priest with Surrender to Madness might be the most broken any spec ever was, at least if you're referring to how much ahead of number 2 it was. In fact, I'm almost positive that's true for single target Nighthold and Emerald Nightmare, like beginning of Legion. I'm pretty sure there's never been a class that's that far. Look!
How comically broken
That is a fucking insane.
Really was.
That's insane. Probably AUG is the only thing that's close to being that much better than everything.
During fights where there was just always something to hit. So even though they had Surrender to Madness running, they weren't at risk of dropping out of Void Form and losing their insanity ever. Where usually a 30 to 40 second Void Form could be pretty good. With
yeah, on the next one though.
Got to be the Dawn Warlords of Draenor.
Mage. Okay, so I don't play Mage, and a lot of you do, so you're probably very passionate about this. I believe, I'm not sure about Ancient WoW, but I think the answer to Fire Mage is actually Ny'alotha with Corruption at the end of BFA. They were the best Mythic Plus class in the game by a mile, and they were the best raid class in the game by a mile. Like, almost surrender. If you include cleave, probably surrender to madness tier broken. For arcane, the answer is probably the WoD raid, HFC, prismatic crystal, that trinket and all that shit, super broken. There were speed runs done in that raid with the ring where like you brought like entirely arcane mages and you just like killed bosses in like 30 seconds. It was insane. For Frost, when was the best Frost mage was? Like, Frost mage has always been good, but I don't think Frost has ever been the best mage spec when it's been the #1 spec in the game, unless it's like some ancient classic shit that I know nothing about. All right, let's hear what he says.
Up, I have Mage, and I'm picking their state during Hellfire Citadel and Warlords of Draenor.
Fair take.
So what is
fair
generally
beams.
an expansion that people look down upon?
That being said, though, as good as Arcane Mage was in Hellfire Citadel, I think Fire Mage at the end of BFA was better. But it's hard to tell because Mythic Plus didn't exist in WoD. But Arcane Mage wasn't like a sick challenge mode class. And I think Fire Mage being the best Mythic Plus class by even better than they were single target, which was significantly more than anyone else, is probably better. But I mean, you're kind of arguing two different things.
For one class and spec, it delivered some truly memorable moments. A new talent mages had in Warlords of Draenor was Prismatic Crystal. You put a crystal down and it would take...
Dude, Fire Mage in BFA was the first time in this game I can remember needing to assemble the fucking Infinity Stones. Like, anyone could do crazy mage damage, but you needed specific items. You needed, like, some bracers from Mechagon. You needed a Font of Power. You needed, you needed tier. And there was, like, one more thing. And if you unlocked all of the Infinity Stones, you just fucking did infinite damage. Oh, and Mastery Corruption.
To nearby targets. The second consideration here was a new trinket from Hellfire Citadel called Prophecy of Fear.
Sick
this
trinket.
made a direct attacks proc.
This is why I don't understand why people are always so opposed to them releasing a bunch of trinkets that say some nonsense-ass shit like this on an equip or an on use, and it's not basic. Like, there's a lot of people that are just like, just give me stat sticks. I just want a flat stat and then an on use stat and then a stat stick, and that's it. Bro, all of the coolest trinkets in WoW's history come from them trying to cook up some shit during the equip or the on use at the bottom that isn't just giving you stats right away. All of them. All of the insanely cool trinkets say something like that. So they should always, even if they miss on a lot of them, bro, to all of us, there's only like 2 or 3 trinkets in every patch anyway. It's the ones that a robot told you were the best for you, and there could be a lot of really cool design trinkets that just didn't happen to be the best, so you don't fucking care about them, and they basically don't exist, outside of them dropping and you being mad about it. So, like, they should always cook with trinkets, because then it has a chance to be, like, crazy and super cool and fun. Really powerful. And stat sticks are boring.
Burst of damage around its targets. Now, most casters could land a hit every few seconds, but Arcane Mage had Arcane Missiles, which hit many times in a row, making Mage
the only memorable stat stick trinket was Arcana Crystal. Yeah, in a bad way.
Be able to benefit from this proc.
All right, let's keep moving. I need to get out of here.
Leading to some pretty extreme is completely insane. Raids back then could stack Arcane. Look at so that Arcane was almost. So that's why for me, Arcane
99th percentile. Is this Fel Reaver? Is this specifically for the second boss, Fel Reaver? I think it was, because that's when people did the speed kills with the ring. But yeah, that's a crazy breakdown right there.
To be the pick for this class. Last but
that's insane.
Not least, we have the Warlock, and for me,
so a couple of old school contenders. Old school for me. It is Demonology Warlock in Throne of Thunder. It is Affliction Warlock in Siege of Orgrimmar. I believe this is true. I believe someone did in Siege of Orgrimmar. They had a weapon on and no gear as Affliction Warlock and did more damage on Fallen Protectors than was possible to do with any other class but Feral Druid. Yeah, I think it might have been a Spark Oaks thing. That guy was a beast. Anyways, That was fucking crazy. Recently, when have locks been insane? So, like, Demos had a couple of good single target tiers. Actually, randomly, Demonology in Battle of Dazar'alor was like 15% more single target than everyone, but no one figured it out until after the race world first because it was because of some weird AoE Azerite trait. Destro and Nyalotha, it wasn't even the best spec, so unfortunate. It was really good on Rod End though, and just in general. Wasn't Destruction pretty strong? Yeah, it's kind of, again, even if a spec is super strong, I think when you're talking about broken, a lot of times for me, it's relative to where you were versus other classes in the game. Because it's kind of hard to compare how strong something was in Throne of Thunder versus Antorus, unless you're talking about how much more relatively it was ahead of everything else. You can't measure strong to strong without the context, right? I don't know. Let's see what he's going to say. Probably some ancient shit. If it's PvP, I'm leaving.
One period in time which I can pick for the Warlock, and that is Mists of Pandaria. Oftentimes in this video, it's been about a particular spec for a class that's been...
This is fair.
...overpowered. For Mists of Pandaria...
The thing is the Warlocks weren't really overpowered during Heart of Fear, Mogashan Palace, or Terrace of Endless Spring. The first entire raid tier, they were okay. They were pretty good. They were not insane. And then they were, like, it was Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar, which are the most memorable raids, 100%. That's only 2/3 of the expansion, and it was 2 different specs. I mean, I guess it's fair.
It was the entire class for the entire expansion.
That's not true.
Destruction underwent changes and got access to Burning Embers, and the version of Chaos Bolt you probably remember where it always crits. Affliction later on in the expansion was an absolute beast of a spec on single target and multi-target fights because they could spread...
I guess it is easy to forget that they weren't really that good in the first tier because Siege of Orgrimmar was like more than a year by itself. So like the time spent in Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar alone was almost the entire time that normal expansions take.
Maintain their dots so much easier. They also got access to Malefic Grasping Mob, a channel type effect which would cause your dots to do bonus damage when it ticked. But the star of the show for Warlocks and Mists of Pandaria has to have been Demonology. It was a totally unique version of this spec which had a high...
Question.
To have been Demonology.
How is he looking at a Mist of Pandaria talent tree? Do you guys think he has this footage from 13 years ago? I bet it's on a private server. And if Blizzard knew that, they would blow up.
It was a totally...
You know, they call them pirate servers.
...unique version of this spec, which had a highly involved playstyle,
They're haters.
needed fight knowledge, and some real min-maxing
They're haters
to
on the
get
pirate
most
servers.
out of it. Eventually, Blizzard would nerf Demonology into the ground, and we had a rather famous interview and quote come out of it, where Ian Hazacostas straight up said, "We'd rather
Remember that guy?
didn't play Demonology." But what made Demo so unique in Mists of Pandaria? Well, first of all was a new resource called Demonic Fury that was gained for your standard abilities. You could then toggle Metamorphosis on as it had a really short cooldown, and your Demonic Fury would begin to drain as well as be spent on powerful abilities. This meant Warlocks could build up resources for when they needed them and then unleash tons of damage on single target or an AoE. Oh, and also during MOP you could cast your filler spells whilst moving thanks to a new talent, Kill Jaden's Cunning.
You could also
There was
blow
also
up.
one trinket in particular which was crazy overpowered with how Demonology worked, called the Unerring Vision of Lei Shen. Any version of this trinket was better than any other trinket for a time. It would give your spells a 100% chance to crit for a few seconds, but in Mists of Pandaria you could snapshot spells. So for example, if you refresh your dots, and especially Doom during this proc, it would cause Doom to always crit during its duration, and every single time Doom crit, it spawned an imp, and those imps cast Fireball which gave you Demonic Fury. This interaction alone was super broken for Demonology. In fact, they had to nerf the trinket specifically for Warlocks because of this. But wait, there's more. There wasn't just one demon form in Mists of Pandaria, there were 2. Whilst Metamorphosis was more for damage, there was also a glyph called Demon Hunting, which would unlock an alternative form called Dark Apotheosis. Metamorphosis. Unlike Meta, this was a permanent transform, and in this form you would take less physical.
Do you remember when demon hunters just fucking took away your demon form, Warlocks? Do you fucking remember that, you little bitches? Remember when your shit just got stolen?
That's magical damage, as well as generating a ton more threat. Now, this wasn't really intended to be a full-on tank spec, despite it mysteriously having some massive threat modifier, but you could make it work on some of the easier content in the game if you just wanted to have fun and see how it played out. This spec was also experimented with during PvP for Mr. Pandaria
what a legend,
as well,
Sparkox.
and Dark Apotheosis was just a bit of fun really from a major glyph, but it was just something else the Mr. Pandaria Warlock had access to. But all in all, Mr. Pandaria was just a great time to play Warlock. Later on, of course, as I mentioned, Demonology would be nerfed to the ground, before in Legion, Demon Hunters came along and took Metamorphosis as an ability,
Dude,
whilst the
stay
demo
mad.
would transform
Stay
and be more about
fucking
summoning
mad,
tons
Warlock.
of demons rather than being
I'm
one
a Warlock,
themselves.
I'm a
And I didn't
demon,
even mention
I'm
in
a
Mr.
demon.
Pandaria, it was when you had the
I
quest
cast
to go and get
spells.
green
Fuck
fire
you.
as well. So overall for Warlock, it just has to be Mr. Pandaria, but more specifically, Demonology during this expansion. And that's it, one state of each class throughout this game is a long history during which I think they were at their most powerful. Let me know if there was a point in time different to what I mentioned, and when you think—
Yeah, I disagree with like all of them, but that's hype. W, all like that shit. W like. Oh, I would have to sign in to do that. How did I get signed out? Fuck yeah. Woo! All right, that was hype. Good stream today, boys. I think the interview's tomorrow, but I'm not sure. So be around tomorrow no matter what, even though it might not happen. And then if it's not tomorrow, it'll be the next day, so be there too. Make sure to... Wait, do they know that I'm about to end stream? They're getting up and stretching and shit? Reptar. 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 Hi, Reptar. Come here. Oh, look at him. Oh, look at little Rep. Oh, he's a little Reptar. Oh. Okay, they know what's up. They're ready. They know. All right, I'll see you later. Dude, it didn't make Ella get up. Fuck. What do I say? All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Dude, Ella cannot be tricked. Bitch, are you... I see her looking at me. How do you know? How do you know when it's actually happening? Fuck. All right.